Hello and welcome to Six Pack. Today I'm gonna start a new series. What if Deku had a bio booster armor? Part 1. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
Professor Martin Taronga, lead scientist, stood among the ancient temple and observed the archaeologists and diggers sifting through the remains. In every way, this temple was unlike any other on the planet. Primarily because it was constructed of stone and was situated inside a glacier at the South Pole. From more than 1,000 miles away, stone. The fact that thermal vents kept the entire temple comfortably warm was what truly made it spectacular. One more thing that is impossible. The temple was carbon dated to be at least 10,000 years old, if not older. One of the archaeologists abruptly displayed a preserved artifact. As he reached to give it to Taronga, Hinjo-chin remarked, "Professor, I think we found something." Taronga shook his head in response to his question, "What do you think it is, sir?" Taronga looked at the gadget, which appeared to pulse as he held it, and said, "No idea, but I can tell you one thing. It is not from Earth." Yau Industrial Complex 2 months later At the Yau Industrial Complex, 2 months later. Taronga cursed in all the languages he was familiar with. He watched the diamond-tip laser drill bounce after hurling it to the ground with all of his repressed rage. He and his team had tried every known way to obtain a sample of the device in the last month. Every effort was unsuccessful. Shin picked up the abandoned drill and placed it back on the shelf, remarking, "It seems to be indestructible." "Yes, it does." Taronga was becoming even more irritated. He picked up the incredibly light Guyver device and said, "I guess we have no choice, we will have to ship it to I-Island and let them try to discover this thing's secrets." At least according to what a linguist had found, Guyver was spelled out in the symbols. However, it took the linguist 2 weeks to think of that. There was still more engraved script to translate. Putting the Guyver in a special safe after first putting it in a sturdy carbon steel storage box. In the hopes that the chairman, owner would accept his suggestion, Taronga went to tell Miyagi Yaoyorozu about sending the device to I-Island. Putting the Guyver device in a different, specially designed plastic container. 4 armed security guards followed Taronga as they boarded the armored vehicle. As the armored car drove toward the nearby airport, 10 additional security officers would follow. Since every guard was a member of Taronga's security force, they were not taking any chances. Thus, they were all essentially enormous brutes. Each one possessed enough firepower to defeat a small army in addition to having a deadly quirk. A gang of criminals gassed the small convoy and took the device before they could turn down the access road. Big Banto was holding the plastic case in his big hands across the city. I scowled at the lock as I turned it over. The gang leader instructed the person known as Shark to take the case, saying, "Yo Shark, bite this lock off. Let's see what we got." Shark's mouth opened wide, and he quickly chomped off the lock with his big, sharp, jagged teeth before returning the case to his leader. Banto scowled as he looked inside. He grabbed the useless football-shaped object and growled as he threw it out the window of their hiding place, yelling, "What the fuck is this? Where is the fucking diamonds, the gold, or the cash?" He yelled, "Fucking worthless piece of junk," with anger. When they believed something positive was about to happen, they had been keeping an eye on Yau Industries for more than a month while they awaited the special shipment of loot to be transported. The guards struck after Gasser put them to sleep. All of that crime was in vain. The birth of the Guyver. Izuku Midoriya ran as hard as he could and looked back to see Katsuki Bakugo and his friends following closely behind. Bakugo angrily exclaimed, "Get back here, Deku, and take what is coming to you," before disappearing from view to avoid potential reports. He gave the fleeing Midoriya a small blast of his quirk. "I am sorely missing him." Midoriya had made the error of declaring in class today that he wanted to take the hero examination. That was the final straw for his former friend. He forced himself to run faster, gasping for breath. Looking for a suitable hiding spot. Wait for Bakugo to stop feeling the need to kill him and stop beating him until he gives in. Midoriya spun down another alley and ducked under a pile of wood that hung out of a dumpster. The wood only managed to stall his 3 assailants for a few seconds. He heard Bakugo yell at him as he got closer to the end of the next alley. Bakugo stopped himself and said, "Wait, Deku, don't go that way, you fucking idiot. You are heading into the Red Blade territory." The warning was yelled once more, but Midoriya was now farther away. With his wings flapping uneasily, Cliven Kuvyuki asked, "What do we do, Bakugo?" Bakugo shrugged after flinching. Bakugo smiled slightly and said, "Perhaps we will be lucky and one of the red blades will kill him." He then turned and glanced back. He felt compelled to track down Midoriya and pull her back to safety, not wanting the fool to actually suffer any consequences. But he would appear weak if Kuvyuki and Hunjo were with him. He concluded that his best course of action was to inform Aunt Inko of the whereabouts of her foolish son and hope he returned unscathed. Izuku Midoriya was in more serious trouble now, and he knew exactly where he was. Unless accompanied by some pro-heroes, even the police did not enter Red Blade territory. Extremely strong ones. With more than 200 members, the Red Blades were the most dangerous gang in the city. Midoriya slipped behind a dumpster to hide and whispered, "I am in deep shit." He reasoned that he might be able to slip back out of this area of the city and return to a safer location if he waited a few hours. Or perhaps he could approach a pro-hero and ask them to help him leave. He felt his heart thumping in his chest as he breathed in and out. He was so overcome with fear that he nearly started crying whenever he heard a sound. He wished he had Kachan's impressive quirk so he wouldn't have to be so terrified. However, he had no quirks, which made him worthless in this society. Deku the Worthless was his name. He nearly fled his hiding spot when something hit the ground beside him. He examined the odd object in the low light. He picked up the strangely shaped metal object and whispered, "What is this thing?" As he gazed at the glowing center of the object, it felt warm in his hands. A menacing voice exclaimed, "Hey look guys." Midoriya shuddered, terrified that he had been found. He realized he was in trouble when the dumpster he was hiding behind moved. They all started laughing, and there were 5 of them. Midoriya attempted to hide his fear as someone else boastfully remarked, "A kid. Looks to me like we got ourselves a new punching bag." They would definitely pursue him if he did. One of the others grabbed him and punched him in the stomach before he could speak. Midoriya hunched over the fist, feeling as though he might throw up, with a whoosh of escaping air and pain. As the original voice exclaimed, "Yo Ginju, I found him, I get to hit him first." Midoriya felt a blow to the right side of his head. The others started kicking him repeatedly as he slumped onto the ground after seeing stars and spitting blood. He grunted in agony, realizing that the strange object he had dropped was only inches from his face. He noticed that it started to pulse with light as he stared at the center. It was splattered with his blood. One of the brutes suddenly pushed his body, face down, directly onto the object. Midoriya let out a scream as it clamped down on his face. Panic is more prevalent than pain. As Midoriya stood up and made a heroic effort to remove the object from his face, one of the others exclaimed, "What the fuck is happening to him?" It started to spin and click, then abruptly stopped for no apparent reason, allowing Midoriya to observe. However, he had a different vision, and information came to him instantly. He heard what sounded like exhaust as he exhaled. One exclaimed, "Holly SSSSHHHHITTT. What the fuck is that thing?" Midoriya saw the 5 of them take an uncontrollable step back. Another said, "No idea. Axe, take it out." Midoriya glanced over at another and saw the man's hands transform into 2 axes. Midoriya easily dodged the swinging blades as the axe-handed man lunged forward. Then, with little effort, he kicked the man in the stomach with his right foot after blocking with his left. 10 feet from the wall, the man flew back with a grunt. Unconscious, landing with a thud. Midoriya declared, his voice both hollow and menacing, "I am the Guyver," unaware of the reason behind his recent statement. I wanted to know what the Guyver was. He then strode over to the others, and within 10 seconds, all 4 of them were moaning in agony on the ground. A cell phone was produced by one of them. The man gasped, "We need help." Midoriya realized he had better flee. He was startled by how quickly he was running as he turned and ran away. In a flash, the alley passed him, and when it came to a dead end, he leapt and sprang up for a good 40 feet, landing on the roof. It was as easy to bolt over one ledge and land on another. He paused, looked around, and saw that everything was visible. He could see as though it were daylight even though it was dark outside. In addition, he could see far away. Looking back, he saw roughly 50 gang members gathered where their friends were trying to climb. The arms and legs of 1 or 2 were broken. He leapt to the street, ducked into the alley, and landed. Midoriya reached up with his clawed hands and attempted to take off the helmet, saying, "Okay, time to get whatever this is off me." It didn't move. He shifted his hands around and tried the back of the armor, but once more he was unable to remove it. In a panic, he grabbed a tiny fragment of shattered mirror and examined himself. He stared at the picture, gasping. He gasped and started to hyperventilate, saying, "Oh Lord." His heart thumped in his chest as he attempted to take off the strange armor once more, grabbing various spots. He yelled, "Get off me! Come on, get off!" loudly, He screamed, "Get off!" And the armor vanished in an instant, but he could still feel it slide down the back of his neck. It was completely painless. Gasping for breath, he looked around. Then moaned, his entire body aching from the previous beating. He felt two hard spots and what felt like two rapidly closing holes when he reached his right hand to the back of his neck. He said, "Oh shit. What the fuck is this?" before making his way slowly home. He considered telling his mother, but decided it might be best to keep it a secret. Taronga stood among the deceased gang members close to midnight. Only 3 red blades were still alive and wearing wrist restraints when their bodies were scattered around. Taronga approached and loomed over the 3 trembling survivors, saying, "I am only going to ask once, then if I do not hear what I want to hear, one of you dies." He asked, "Where is the Guyver?" And each of the 3 gave a negative headshake. Calmly, he said, "The metal object you stole from me earlier today. Where is it?" And one of them answered right away. The man stammered out, pointing to the window. Big Bongo threw it out the window. After giving a quick glance to a few of his private security men, Taronga left to conduct a search. Glancing back at the trio, Robert Grimes, the captain of his guards, moved forward, aimed his gun at the 2 others, and fired twice in response to Taronga's order to keep that one alive. Kill the others. Just before Grimes fired, they both screamed and pleaded. Taronga walked slowly in the direction of the exit after saying, "You better hope they find it, friend, or you will not have the same merciful end." Desiring to guide the Guyver's search. When Izuku Midoriya woke up in the morning, he let out a breath and sat up in shock. He was free of all the wounds from his beating. He was aware that recovery took days due to Kachan's previous beatings. He felt incredibly good as he stood up. "I'm feeling energized." Examining his arms first, followed by the remainder of his body. He let out a gasp. He had developed distinct muscle tone in some way. He reached to the back of his neck and exclaimed, "Wow." He wondered how strong he was, so he went to his barbells and slipped onto the bench. It not only healed me, but made me stronger. There were 100 pounds on the set at the moment. He put his hands on the bar and effortlessly lifted the entire thing. After adding all of his weight, he continued in the same manner. He had no trouble lifting the weights. 325 pounds. He muttered in amazement. His next action was to attempt to activate the armor once more. Which was simple for him. He only needed to say or think, "Activate," to have it slam around him in an instant. Then, he simply thought or said, "Off," to get it off, and it vanished once more. He took off his shorts, turned on the radio, and made his way to the shower. Then he heard a sound that made him feel cold. This just in. Over 200 men were found killed this morning in the Narasoki district. It has been reported that all 217 men were gang members of the Red Blades and thought responsible for a great amount of criminal activities. Best Genist and Death Arms are conducting an investigation of the scene. The police report that all of them appeared to have been shot or stabbed. Further updates will be available later today. Now on to sports. The North American Hero Academy had their annual sports festival today. Izuku switched off the radio. Sat on his bed after that. Izuku asked himself, who could take out all of them? And then gave it some thought. He wondered, could it be because of this thing, the Guyver? He got up again and went into the bathroom to shower. After breakfast, he told his mother that although he had indeed entered the Red Blade territory, he had also fled right away. Izuku went to use his laptop to conduct some research. He hated lying to his mother, but he didn't want her to know the truth. He started by typing in a single word to conduct a search. Guyver. A gossip columnist wrote 2 of the articles that appeared. He bit his lower lip while reading the articles, but then he came across something that could be useful. According to the reporter, Yau Industries was concealing all significant information. As he stood there, after lying to his mother once more about going to the inner-city library, he thought to himself, I guess that is a good place to start. Instead, he made his way to the Yau Industrial Complex via the train station. Midoriya felt overwhelmed as she entered the massive complex's lobby. Not knowing who to ask or where to go, he began to turn around after swallowing and almost ran into someone. His eyes widened as he stammered, "Oh sorry." Gazing at a girl who was not much older than him but who, in his opinion, was the most attractive person he had ever seen. The girl grinned. She squinted at him after saying, "That is all right." Midoriya felt like leaving when she asked, "Are you lost or are you here to see someone?" However, he was unable to move his feet. Midoriya stammered, "No, not really. I was just leaving." Then she smiled once more. A massive guard approached and gave him a menacing look. The large guard put his combat hand on Midoriya's shoulder and inquired, "Are you all right, Miss Yaoyorozu?" He then grinned down at Midoriya, thinking it would be amusing to see how far he could toss the boy. "Is this boy bothering you? Should I throw this boy out?" he asked. With firmness, Yaoyorozu removed the large man's hand from Midoriya's shoulder and said, "I am fine and he is not bothering me. You are. Now go away." With a grimace, the large man turned to leave. She smiled at him again and said, "Sorry about that. Some of the guards here are real goons. Will you know my name? Can I know yours?" He answered, "Midoriya. My name is Izuku Midoriya." Yaoyorozu then held up her right hand. She shook his hand and waved at him, saying, "Momo Yaoyorozu. Please call me Momo. It is a pleasure to meet you, Izuku." Izuku briefly considered saying that he simply got lost, but he decided to tell the truth after letting out a loud sigh. "So what brings you here to my family's company? At least some of it." Izuku, who didn't really want to trust anyone around him, spoke quickly and quietly, "Listen, I found something called the Guyver and after seeing the articles about it on the internet hoping that someone here might be able to help me." He looked around and saw about a dozen armed guards, all of whom resembled the large one that had come earlier. Large and hazardous. Momo said, "The what?" before taking out her phone. Checking the company's classified and regular projects. She looked around as her eyes grew wide. She took his right hand in her left and nearly dragged him to the elevators, saying, "Okay, don't say anything else. Come with me. I will take you to Professor Cynthia Clemens. She is not in charge of that, but I trust her, more than I trust Martin Taronga." Silently passing the two guards at the elevator doors, Momo examined the green-haired boy on the elevator to the 5th floor. She thought he was kind of cute because she could see distinct muscle tone beneath his loose shirt. The majority of boys and young men made absurd attempts to win her approval, pleading with her to join them out. On multiple occasions, someone even requested to take her to bed. Most of the strange things they wanted to do to her made her feel disgusted. This boy was different. As far as she knew, he had never fixed his gaze on her thighs, ass, or breasts. He hadn't said anything offensive or made any remarks about her qualities. Simply gazed into her eyes. Yes, she liked him right away. She kept his hand and guided him down the hallway to one of the secure doors once they reached the assigned floor. Izuku fainted when Momo Yaoyorozu took hold of his hand. He was ecstatic, despite the fact that it was only to lead him inside. He was amazed that a girl with her beauty would actually touch him. He struggled to keep from stumbling and looking foolish as he followed her. He felt as though he was perspiring like a horse and hoped that his palms were not damp. Whatever that meant. Once inside a laboratory with a door that implied scientific research, Momo led him directly up to an old woman with a cane in her left hand and glasses. The old woman laughed and said, "Ah, good morning, Momo. I see you brought me a guest. Or is this your new boyfriend?" Momo wrinkled her nose and scowled at the much older woman, saying, "Oh, behave, Cynthia." The elderly woman laughed when she said, "You know I am looking for the perfect boy to become my boyfriend and I have not found one yet." Cynthia nodded when she said, "No, this is Izuku Midoriya. Do you know anything about the Guyver unit?" In response to Cynthia's question, "Yes, it has everyone in the scientific department stumped. We have all been working on it for the past 2 months. Why?" Momo made Izuku sit down on a chair while continuing to hold his hand firmly. Cynthia was aware of this, but she chose to remain silent, speculating that the young girl might have finally found love. Momo expressed concern, saying, "For some reason, he found it. That means it is no longer here in the secure safe. Based on what she had read in the files, the item shouldn't have been left lying around." Cynthia was quite interested in this. "Where is it, young man?" Cynthia inquired curiously, firmly resting on her cane. Momo glanced down at him, too. Izuku inhaled and exhaled repeatedly while gazing at the ground. Both of them gaped at Izuku as he whispered, "Inside me." Cynthia gasped and asked, What do you mean inside you?" in an attempt to ascertain whether the boy was being honest. As Izuku gave the order, they both turned to look. "It injected itself inside me. Look at the back of my neck." Momo let go of his hand and extended it upward, indicating the 2 spots with tiny holes. Cynthia laughed and shook her head when he said, "See it?" Cynthia said sharply, "Okay, enough joking around. Now where is the Guyver unit?" Izuku swallowed and turned back to face her. In an attempt to convince them, Izuku said, "I was telling the truth. Last night, I found it and it attached itself to my face. Then after it sort of injected itself inside me. I know it sounds ridiculous but that is what happened." He could see that neither of them believed him when he said, "Oh, and before it did that, it sort of made some type of armor around me." He stood up and spread his hands to the side, saying, "Okay, I'll show you. Activate." The armor slapped itself around him after fragments burst out of the two holes, putting the armor back on him. Both young and old women gasped in surprise as he said, "See. I was telling the truth," in a hollow, irritating voice. A big muscle man leaned forward in his chair 3 stories above Clemens' lab. He looked at the monitor that displayed the elderly scientist's lab, grinning. He grabbed the landline and punched in the number. Over the receiver, the man said to Professor Taronga, "Sir, I found the Guyver and you won't believe what I am looking at." The phone fell silent as he continued, "You might want to get up here." After 5 minutes, Taronga came in and gazed at the monitor. "Get your men. After that boy leaves, follow him, and then when you get the opportunity bring him back here. I have a lot of questions for that young man," Taronga said with a grin. "Desperate to examine the armor up close," I said, "so that is what the Guyver unit does. How interesting. To truly get a good look at it, maybe during an autopsy." When the initial shock subsided, Cynthia snatched up a variety of tools and gadgets. As the 68-year-old scientist talked about acting like a young woman again, Momo laughed. The old scientist was so excited that he forewent the cane. Cynthia remarked angrily, "Damn. I still can't detect anything about the metal, or the power source." She grabbed a tiny file and ran it over Izuku's forearm. She finally felt her age and sat down, saying, "Can't even get a sample." She said to the armored teenager, "If it's okay, may I ask you 100 questions? Please sit down." Izuku sat down in a nearby chair and said, "Sure. I guess it might explain why this happened to me." The legs bowed a little and it creaked. He got up and walked to a nearby hardened bench. Momo grinned and walked to the door after he said, "I think I better sit on this. I do not think the chair can hold me up." Momo opened the door and said, "I better tell my father about this. He would want to know." Cynthia smiled with delight as she said, "I will be back, don't run off, Izuku." Okay. For years, Momo's closest friend and confidant had been the older woman. Someone with whom she could discuss anything she was thinking about. Things Momo refused to discuss with her mother. Specifically, boys. Because Cynthia had extensive knowledge of the topic and was a great-grandmother. In particular, the considerably older woman had 5 previous marriages to 5 different men. Cynthia picked up another device and started testing, saying, "Oh, he will be here. Now, I think we need to determine how strong and fast you are." Momo pulled out her phone and paused outside the door for a moment. She called a few guards she trusted. Until further notice, she requested that they guard Cynthia's door. Taronga and his mercenary guards are not trustworthy. She boarded the elevator and went to her father's workplace. Her father looked up from his massive desk and grinned as he strode confidently into his enormous office. She grinned and said, "Hi, Daddy." He grinned back before scowling. He could tell by the expression on his daughter's face that she was either up to no good again or was going to do something bad. Miyagi Yaoyorozu began by asking, "So what have you been up to?" With a hint of satisfaction that she was, he said, "Please tell me that you are not causing problems again with Taronga." The haughty jerk from I-Island was hired by the board of directors, and if he had his way, Taronga would not be permitted inside the structure. In addition to the guards Taronga had employed, they were all essentially mercenaries and weren't even affiliated with Yau Industries. Momo sat down and said, "Well, somewhat. Let me explain." She told him everything in less than 5 minutes, and her father let out a sharp sigh. That is not good. The Guyver device or unit was supposed to be on its way to I-Island under full security escort. How the hell did some kid find it, and more importantly, how is he using it? Taronga told me it was some type of power source. Not some type of weapon. Her dad grumbled. His business did not deal in firearms. He said, "So where is this boy right now?" And Momo grinned widely. Thinking that if Taronga knew, he might do something unpleasant to Izuku, Momo said, "With Cynthia. She is trying to figure out exactly what the Guyver is. Dad, I think it might be best to keep Taronga out of this. I do not trust him. Maybe even propose operating on him to remove the device. Disregarding whether Izuku was killed or not." Momo stood up and walked around her father's desk after he said, "I will try. The board might overrule me, but until then I will order that he not be involved." Giving him a hug. Miyagi Yaoyorozu gazed at Momo with mild concern as she grinned broadly and said, "Thanks, Dad." Momo's cheeks turned red as her father asked, "You are not interested in this young man, are you?" She shook her head. In a defensive manner, Momo said, "I just met him. How could I be interested in someone I just met?" and departed before her father could mention that this was what had happened to him and her mother. Her mother was a model, and he had been a low-level executive. From the moment they met, they clicked. She continued to deny that she could fall in love with someone after only meeting him as she stepped back into the elevator. Even so, she still found him cute. Izuku hurriedly apologized, crushing the strength measuring instrument in his hand. Cynthia took what had once been a perfectly round sphere from him and said, "That is no problem." She was able to gauge Izuku's strength in the Guyver armor before it stopped transmitting information, even though it was now essentially destroyed. "It seems that you are about 12 times stronger than you should be. You told me when you fought those thugs, that you were strong but now you feel stronger. Was that after your body increased with muscle mass?" He replied with a nod, then became aware that she was unable to see him nod. Izuku responded, "Yes. When I woke up this morning, I was stronger. I bench pressed 325 pounds, where before I had trouble doing it 100. Cynthia wrote that down on her pad, then took a seat. "Okay, as I believe I understand it, the stronger your human body is, the stronger the Guyver is. Yes, it increased your human muscles, but if you exercise and become stronger, I suspect that you might increase how many times stronger you are now." Cynthia replied with a grin. She requested to perform a physical examination on him after he reverted to his human state. Desiring to know the whole truth about what the Guyver had done, she grabbed a stethoscope and said, "Take off your shirt and let's begin." Momo nearly stumbled when she entered the room at that precise moment, staring at Izuku's bare chest and abs with wide eyes. Cynthia went over to collect a blood sample using a couple of needles. Going by, she teased her young friend by whispering, "Breathe, Momo. Breath, and you might want to wipe your chin. You are drooling." Momo gave her a glare. Momo whispered back, "That is not funny." After gathering herself, she approached Izuku as he put down his shirt. As she approached Izuku, she said, "See, I came back. Oh Cynthia, good news my dad put you in charge of." Well, finding out about the Guyver, she tried not to look at him, but her gaze kept straying to his amazing body. She hoped her wandering gaze would go unnoticed. Cynthia tested his reflexes, took a blood sample, and listened to his heartbeat. After finishing, he grabbed his phone and sent his mother a text message letting her know he was still at the library. Momo wrinkled her nose at the text. Izuku read the response to remind himself to eat lunch and something nutritious, and he explained, "I think it best not to tell my mom where I actually am. She might overreact." He returned his phone to his pocket and remarked, "She worries a lot." Cynthia pulled up a chair once the tests were finished. Izuku gave it some thought before Cynthia said, "Okay, I think that we have enough to keep me busy for at least a month. So what are you going to do?" "Well, maybe I'll follow your advice and strengthen myself so the Guyver can be stronger." Izuku grinned widely and put his shirt back on. He felt like dancing and said, "Then I am going to take the hero examination." Since he didn't have a quirk, he had little to no chance of going. But he could with the Guyver. She really wanted to be with him, so Momo suggested, "At home I have a fully equipped gym, you could work out there. Even if it was only to increase his strength." Izuku gave a headshake. "No, I have another idea. There is a beach near where I live. For years people have used it as a dump. I will clean it up. That should be an adequate workout to make myself stronger." Izuku responded with a grin. The young girl's rapid-fire speech made Cynthia laugh. "Sounds like a great idea. Do you mind if I come by? Maybe keep you company and monitor your progress. Hey, I can arrange for some dump trucks to help haul the junk away. What do you think?" Momo said. Izuku responded with a big smile, "Okay, that would help a lot. Having Momo around doesn't bother me at all." Momo wrote her phone number on a piece of paper and gave it to him after he said, "I think I better head home. Tomorrow I will start cleaning the beach." After giving it a wide-eyed stare, he wrote down his own. As they left through the door, Momo said, "I will escort you out." Cynthia watched them intently as she added, "We can talk later and set up a time to meet at the beach tomorrow." Feeling as though Momo has located the boy she was seeking. By no means was he flawless. However, the young girl secretly desired him because he was exactly the right kind. 03 Large, muscular men in a car across from the main entrance watched Izuku Midoriya leave the building. From the backseat of the car, Robert Grimes gave the driver a nod and said, "Follow him. Do not let him see us following him." Grimes, meanwhile, searched for the ideal moment to carry out Taronga's directive. But at the moment, it didn't seem likely because there were so many people present. Grimes let out a sharp breath as the boy stepped into the train. Knowing that it would be impossible to track the train, especially in afternoon traffic, he said, "Shit. I guess we will have to hope to locate him again later. Fortunately, they were aware of his name and would soon find out the kid's residence. As the train sped off, he took another look and said, "Take us back." Izuku flinched as he stepped onto the beach. It served as a massive landfill for almost anything you could imagine. Garbage, tons and tons. With a big smile, he said, "This is going to take months to clean up." A few minutes ago, Momo had joined him. As she looked across the beach at piles nearly 40 feet high, Momo remarked, "The 2 trucks will be here in an hour." "Whoa, that is a lot of junk." He removed his shirt and proceeded to the first object he came across. A washing machine. He heaved it and dragged it to one side, where you would throw it in once the dump trucks arrived. Returning to bring more to the area he decided would be designated for scrap metal. Momo approached and took a seat at a picnic table, observing him while he carried and lifted trash off the beach. After 4 hours, he collapsed on the ground close to the tables, filthy and sweating. Water gushing from a jug he brought. She said, glancing at the now full dump trucks, "Not a bad start." The drivers came back and took the trash to the scrapyard or the dump. Although Izuku was exhausted, he acknowledged that the workout felt good and said, "Yeah, but it's still going to take me a couple of months to finish. After I take a shower, I need to figure out everything that Guyver can do. Practice with it and make sure that I can use it. The problem is I have no idea where I can do that without someone seeing me." Momo grinned. He was a little hesitant to accept Momo's explanation that is easy, there is an abandoned woodlot behind my house. You can practice there. That is where I practice sometimes. Momo laughed and shook her head in response to his question, "Won't the owner be upset that I am there?" Momo got up and sniffed himself, saying, "Nope. I own it. You said something about needing a shower." Yes, he was in dire need of a shower. He started to move toward his and his mother's apartment building after picking up his shirt and the empty water jug. Then he saw Momo walking beside him. "I thought I would wait in your apartment if that is all right. If you do not want me to, I can wait here." Izuku dreaded what was going to happen and said, No, that is fine. I just have to warn you about my mom. She might. Okay, she will embarrass me and probably you." In the elevator, Momo nearly burst out laughing. Sweating more than he did when he hefted and moved all the junk on the beach, Izuku appeared to be having a heart attack. He opened his door. In a prayerful whisper, he said, "Please do not let my mom embarrass me." As she emerged from the kitchen, Midoriya exclaimed, "Izzy, is that you?" Her eyes widened in surprise. Izuku stammered a little as he explained, "Mom, this is Momo Yaoyorozu. I guess you could say a new friend of mine." He fervently hoped his mother wouldn't make fun of him. However, his hopes and prayers were swiftly crushed. With a gleeful grin, Inko said, "Girlfriend?" And they both swiftly replied, "Just friends." As the elder Midoriya introduced herself, Momo took her hand and shook it. "Oh, that is a pity, she is really pretty. Because my son is not being a gentleman, I am Inko Midoriya. You can call me Inko, Miss Yaoyorozu." Without revealing Izuku's earlier fabrication about his true location yesterday, Momo said, "Momo, I met your son yesterday at the library and I volunteered to help him clean the beach." Izuku questioned whether Inko had the courage to go take a shower. Yes, his project. I for one am very proud of him for doing that. Long ago that beach was clean and a really nice place to spend a day at. Then a bunch of idiots began to dump their junk there and, well, you see it now. In case his mother took out the photo albums and humiliated him severely. Momo remarked, "You mentioned cleaning up." Izuku grudgingly made his way to his bathroom, looking back. As soon as the door closed, Inko said, "Oh, don't worry, Izzy. I swear not to say anything too embarrassing." The elder woman motioned for the younger to take a seat at the kitchen table and said, "Okay, I lied. Would you like some tea, Momo?" Making a cup of mint tea for her. Momo nearly choked on her tea when she asked, "So Momo, do you really like my son, to the point of being more than just friends?" She looked down, blushing a little. She put her left hand on Momo's and grinned, saying, "Oh, you do." Changing the topic to something else while Momo tried to gather herself, she said, "Do not worry, I won't say anything." 0 at the woodlot. 3 hours later, Izuku was wearing the Guyver armor. Ran along a path Momo had prepared for her to use. Stopping as he was done, she sat on a big rock boulder and looked at her stopwatch. "Wow, that is 2 miles and you ran it in 3 minutes flat. Were you running at full speed?" she inquired. Momo whistled as Izuku answered, "No, about half speed." A tiny burst of energy from over his eyes struck a nearby large rock as he turned slightly, saying, "You know what is funny? I seem to know all the things that the Guyver can do. Like this. Leaving the stone with a carbon imprint. Or this. He raised both hands, and two long blades that resembled swords sprang out of his forearms. They were roughly 2 feet long, and Momo could see that they were very sharp. He approached a tree and carefully cut off a few branches. As Momo watched the blades vanish back into his forearms, she remarked, "From what Cynthia told me, that armor is indestructible. Those blades probably could cut through anything known to man." Izuku took a breath and said, "So I better be careful with those, then." The armor disengaged and essentially injected itself in the back of his neck when he said, "Off." I smiled at Momo, who returned the smile, and said, "Thank you for allowing me to practice here. Until I am ready, I do not want anyone else to know about. Well, me being the Guyver." As he sat down on a lower boulder, Momo told him, "That is okay. I am actually noting down everything for Cynthia. She is hoping to somehow copy it." Izuku frowned as he considered her company selling the Guyver to the military and using it as a weapon of war. So she wants to create weapons. Momo gave a headshake. Momo said firmly, "No, nothing like that. But if the police had armor much like yours, then criminals with very powerful quirks would not be such a threat anymore. That is what Cynthia wants. Her grandson is a police officer in New York City and he has been injured twice. So this is personal to her." She shared this with Izuku. The armor would still protect the people and those who served, even if it lacked weapons. It was totally logical. They kept discussing that, neither of them noticing the 12 men 40 meters away, hiding in the brush. Zero Grimes kept his distance and cautiously raised his communicator to his lips, so that neither Miss Yaoyorozu nor the boy could hear him. He whispered in it. As he waited for Taronga to respond, he said, "Target acquired, sir. One problem, Miss Yaoyorozu is with him. Should we proceed or wait?" The voice of Taronga said in Grimes's earwig, "Pull out. I do not want any harm to come to Yaoyorozu." Grimes let out a breath and switched off the communicator. Grimes said to the others, who were all wearing full camouflage suits, "Okay, contact the others and move out. The boss does not want to risk it." They all nodded and disappeared into the underbrush. Grimes joined them after a few seconds of waiting. Jealousy on the second day of the cleanup. Momo watched as Izuku removed more of the scrap metal from the beach under the shade of a tree. He threw it into the back of the dump truck after lifting it above himself. He was working with his shirt off once more, and she couldn't help but look at his rippling muscles. Then realized that there were others who shared her admiration for him. She looked over and noticed 3 teenage girls standing a few meters away, all of them laughing and observing Izuku. She was offended by this because she thought they were insulting him or saying something nasty about him. She inserted the receiver into her ear, forming a bionic earwig. It's tuned to the 3 girls. They picked up what they were essentially whispering to one another right away. The blonde let out a sharp sigh as the red-haired girl whispered to her friends, "I can't believe that's Izuku Midoriya. When did he become such a hottie?" When Izuku leaned over to heft up a metal bathtub, the blonde whispered back, "You are not kidding. I mean, look at him. Gods, if I knew I would have been nicer to him in class." The 3 of them gasped. Then, as he carried it to the dump truck and threw it in, all 3 of them started to glare at him. The blonde said, and the other 2 grumbled, "I think I might go down and ask him to take me to the movies tonight." Declaring their desire to do so, one of them then turned to see Momo. When the dark-haired girl said, "Hey, that girl there, she was here yesterday when I first saw him here. Do you think maybe she is his girlfriend?" The other 2 flinched and turned to look suspiciously at Momo. The blonde said, "I doubt it, but maybe we better find out." Momo removed the earwig so they wouldn't know she had been listening. Momo tried to think of what she would say to them as they got closer. She did not want Izuku to be with anyone else, even though she did like him. In particular, she assumed that none of those bitches, who were in school with him, gave him any attention. Then she experienced an odd sensation that could only be jealousy. She had been a little upset when they began to truly appreciate and admire his physique. Izuku was prepared to approach them and tell them to stop staring at her. She had fallen in love with someone she had only met 2 days prior, and she realized that the impossible had happened. The blonde moved closer, and she looked up. "Pardon me, my friends and I were wondering. Are you? Is Izuku Midoriya?" The girl was hesitant to make any assumptions and was unsure of how to phrase the question, so I smirked a little. Momo looked lovingly at Izuku and said, "Oh, you mean my boyfriend that is cleaning the beach?" Her smile grew more sinister. She told the blonde girl, making sure the girl's 2 friends heard her, "Yes, I am here to visit him while he works cleaning the beach. Later, after he is done for the day, we will be going to a movie." Not loud enough, though, for Izuku to hear her clearly. After saying, "Well, okay, thank you," the blonde turned to return to her friends. Momo nearly burst out laughing as she replaced the earwig. The girl muttered angrily, "Yes, that fucking bitch is with him." The other two complained. They cursed themselves for not realizing that they ought to have approached Izuku long ago if they had known how attractive he was. The three girls stormed off after a few minutes, and Momo finally burst out laughing. I leaned back and observed him at work. She pondered for a while how she was going to make him her boyfriend, not knowing what to do next. Momo muttered to herself, "Okay, I like him. Now all I have to do is get him to ask me out. So how do I do that? It would be strange if she asked him, so he knew he had to ask her." Startled, he collapsed on the grass, gasping for air after finishing for the day. Izuku grabbed his jug of water and drank heavily, gasping, "Wow, I am beat. I think I am too tired to come by to practice today if that is all right." Then splattered the rest on him. Momo's eyes widened as she watched the water trickle down his toned abs and pecs, her heart thumping in her chest. She swallowed and looked away from him, instead focusing on the sea. She forced herself to calm down. Momo noticed that her cheeks were starting to get warm and remarked, "You do look tired. Maybe that is a good idea." Momo shrugged when Izuku asked, "Say, what did Hoshi Yaminoto, Claire Smith, and Ginger Roberts want? I saw them as I was working." Momo gave him one of her water bottles and lied, saying, "Nothing. They just stopped by to watch your progress and asked me how much longer are you going to work on this." He grinned, took the bottle, and drained it after she said, "Drink, you really did a lot today." Momo shook her head when Izuku said, "Thanks. Those three girls were in my class at school. I guess they told you how much of a geek I am." I was tempted to explain that the three girls were merely there to comment on how attractive he was to them and to admire his body. However, she was afraid that he might have a crush on one of them, which would ruin her chances of becoming his girlfriend. Momo threw him a towel to wipe off some of the sweat and said firmly, "No, they didn't say anything like that, and you are not a geek." Then he bit his lower lip and closed his eyes. Izuku whispered, Momo, my mom wants you to come to lunch today. You can say no and she will understand." Momo grinned broadly. Momo stood up and said, "I would love to. Are you rested enough to head out?" Momo took his left hand in her right as they walked back toward the apartment. She entwined her fingers with his. She saw the three girls on the way, and they were all staring at her with jealousy. As she tightened her grip on his hand, Momo thought, "Unfortunately, you should never judge a book by its cover. Because over time the cover can change." Izuku felt dizzy again as Momo took hold of his hand. The fact that he was holding her hand was unbelievable to him. He didn't ask her why, not wanting to draw attention to himself or ask for an explanation. Instead, he grinned and they made their way to his mother's and his own apartment. 01 person was standing on a nearby roof, admiring Izuku for a completely different reason, but neither of them noticed him. Could he be the one? He seems to care about others rather than himself. After several hours of backbreaking labor cleaning the beach, the large pro-hero joined a young adolescent girl and continued to observe her. He whispered. After a few minutes, the two proceeded to walk in the direction of an apartment building. He would go back and watch the boy tomorrow, since he knew he would be back then. After cleaning the beach for the past month, Izuku noticed that he had grown stronger, which, upon verification, enhanced the Guyver's strength. What confused him was that, for some reason, Momo was present every day while he trained and worked. He saw Momo as he heaved up another old washing machine and tossed it into the back of a dump truck. After grinning, she resumed reading her book. He let out a breath, moved to the next object to be dragged off the beach, and carried on with his work. Momo looked up from her book and watched Izuku with satisfaction. She had thought of a number of strategies to persuade him to ask her out during the previous month. Considering potential locations for their date, from dinner at any nearby restaurant to the movies. Refusing to take her to a posh restaurant where he might feel uneasy. Her desire to kiss him and feel his lips on hers for her first kiss from a boy was what made her heart race. She wondered what it would be like to kiss him, and she had studied kissing. She didn't notice or hear that someone had come up behind her while she was focused on Izuku. Momo let out a sharp exhale as a deep, familiar voice said, "Excuse me, miss. I am here." Not precisely examining the voice's origin. Instead, Deepening chose to essentially ignore the person in question. Momo stated methodically, "No, I am not interested. Please do not ask me for my phone number or email address. Yes, that boy is my boyfriend. So please do not ask me out. I have no intention of going out with you. Go away." She had said that so frequently that it came naturally to her. She had been approached by several boys and young men since the 4th day. A couple had even tried some dumb, corny lines on her, such as asking her if she wanted to go out with them or requesting her phone number. Declaring unequivocally that Izuku was her boyfriend and that she had no plans to date anyone else, she shot them all down. Momo looked up at the stranger as the voice said, "That is not exactly why I walked over here." Her eyes went wide with surprise. Momo felt her face heat up with shame and said, "All Might. Oh my. Sorry if I was rude." The world's greatest hero let out a loud laugh. Momo shrugged and All Might said, "That's okay. I just had a question. I've been seeing that boy there every day for the past month cleaning the beach. Why is he doing it?" When a reporter stopped by and asked essentially the same question as All Might, Momo responded, "He is doing it to build up his muscles and because he wants to make the beach a nice place again." All Might asked, "Then why are you here?" Momo grinned and then made sure Izuku was sufficiently far away. Her responses were not entirely false, there was some truth to her statements. "Because I am his girlfriend and I want to spend time with him. He wants to do this all by himself and won't let me help him." She wanted to date Izuku because she enjoyed spending time with him and he wanted to handle everything on his own. Considering all of the memorabilia in Izuku's room, she informed him, "You should know he is probably your biggest fan." A week prior, she had seen it when she requested to take a shower before staying for dinner. She felt hot and sweaty because it had been such a hot day. With an enormous smile, All Might remarked, "If I had time I would remain and meet him, but I have elsewhere to be right now." His time was running out, and he was certain that he was nearly ready to return to his regular self. He exhaled forcefully, jumped far into the air, and vanished. Momo was perplexed as she watched him go. Considering that rather than simply taking off, it would have been nice if the ultimate hero had at least met Izuku. She returned to observing Izuku after shaking her head. Zero Izuku was being watched by 3 other people in a black van next to the beach. Grimes fanned his face with a newspaper and commanded, "Turn on the air conditioner." Within minutes of the driver starting the van, cool air began to flow from the vents. "We can't risk it after almost a whole fucking month," he exclaimed angrily. Unless Momo Yaoyorozu was in the vicinity of Izuku Midoriya. There were too many onlookers. To make matters worse, All Might appeared to be keeping an eye on the boy as well. Fearfully, the driver said, "That was All Might." Grinning at the driver, Grimes said, "Taronga ain't paying me enough to tangle with All Might." The only issue was that he thought the same thing. Although all 3 of them possessed quirks that increased their strength, they would be useless against someone with All Might's level of power. "We wait, besides the boss is not in that much of a hurry. He got Gomez to hack into Professor Cynthia's computer, so he is happy at the moment going over her research into the Guyver." Grimes said something that wasn't entirely accurate. Although Taronga was not entirely happy, she also did not want young Yaoyorozu to suffer any harm. Grimes had a secret suspicion that the young woman was the object of the much older man's intentions. Grimes knew that the young girl was essentially jail bait, but he could understand. Despite the fact that her body was capable of stopping traffic. The other man in the van put down his binoculars and turned to face Grimes, asking, "What if he decides to get more impatient?" Grimes told them, "Then we risk it and hope we do not have to hurt her." Grimes was already considering using Shinji Minjini to subdue the girl if needed. For fear of getting a little hands on her, he did not trust the others to even touch her. He was one of them. Anyone would be too tempted not to at least feel the young girl's possessions. He didn't worry about Shinji because he liked men more than women. Grimes was not bothered by this. He picked up his cell phone and proceeded to make his hourly report to Taronga, saying, "As for me, I rather wait until the perfect moment to grab the kid." Zero Momo took his hand in hers as they walked back to his apartment. She enjoyed holding Izuku's hand, and he seemed to enjoy it as well, as he did not object. She was still trying to gently urge him to initiate contact. Invite her to go on a date. But her patience was beginning to wear thin. He still hadn't even made any indication that he might be interested in her after nearly a month had passed. She thought he would discover that she wanted him to ask her out, so she had made subtle comments about certain movies and flirted with him enough. Still, no success. She sat at the table and huffed loudly as he went to the bathroom. As Inko handed her a cup of tea, he inquired, "What is the matter, dear?" As Momo sipped the herbal tea, she complained, "Boys, they're so dense." Inko laughed. Inko said, "They can be. Is my son being dense?" And Momo grimaced and wrinkled her nose. Then gave a frustrated nod. "Well, you have to understand. He has not had much experience with girls. Those from his school barely talk to him. So if you want him to do something you might have to come out and tell him. Otherwise he will have no clue that you do like him," she suggested, and Momo grinned. Inko grinned at Momo as she said, "In other words, I have to ask him out or he might not. I wanted him to ask me. Oh well. If you do not mind Inko, I will. Inko winked at her, and Momo understood completely. Good. Just remember, if you want anything from him, you are going to have to make him do it. Izuku emerged with his hair completely dry with a towel. Giving Momo another wink. She picked up her purse and walked out, saying, I need to run to the store really quick. I should be back in a minute or so. As Izuku watched his mother go, he was perplexed by this. She would typically visit the store early in the morning. Not in the afternoon. Momo took a seat at the table and made him a cup of tea, then undermined her determination. Momo's hands started to shake and she said, Izuku. Izuku looked at her and grinned, yes Momo. Her knees started to sway, and she noticed that her mouth was getting dry. This was the moment when she would discover whether he liked her enough to ask her out. She said, do you like me? And Izuku nodded and grinned. Momo chose to accept Izuku's response, of course I like you Momo. You have been a wonderful friend. Stop being evasive and just ask. Izuku stared at Momo, not quite understanding her question, would you go out with me today? She chose to be even more direct because she could tell. With his mouth hanging open and his eyes widening in surprise, she blurted out, Izuku, I am asking you to go on a date with me. Feeling a little self-conscious that he hadn't spoken yet, she demanded, well, say something. Izuku stammered out, his voice alternating between high and low tones, sorry, well I have been trying to get the courage to ask you out. But I kept telling myself that you were way too pretty to even like me that way. Then became aware that he had not responded to her. With a broad smile on his face, he said quickly, oh yes, I would love to go out with you. Grinning, she grasped his right hand. Izuku went to change into better clothes after Momo gave the order, good. There is a movie I have been wanting to see. You get ready and I will leave your mother a note, telling her where we are going. Refusing to go out with Momo while sporting shorts and a t-shirt. In the meantime, Momo sent Inko a brief note. She signed it and waited for Izuku, saying, you were right. Going to the movies, we'll bring him back later. 0. I am tired of the excuses and I am tired of waiting. Get him now and I do not care if Momo Yaoyorozu sees you. Just do not harm her. Taronga spoke on the radio. After reviewing Cynthia's research, he felt his patience had run out and was ready to begin his own. Grimes let out a sharp sigh. Grimes said, yes sir. He shut off the radio and turned to face the other two. The two others smiled widely as he gave the order, this is it, as soon as we see him. We do it. I'm prepared and eager to do something instead of just waiting for something to happen. The kid's mother would not interfere because they had just seen her go. The two men nodded and exited the van. All right, Blake, you wait for them by the corner, and you Hinji, wait there. Remember your orders, no harm is to come to Momo Yaoyorozu, and keep your perverted hands off her. Understand. The three of them waited outside for a few minutes. Momo and the child emerged. Grimes moved in front of them right away. He said sharply, you are coming with us, Midoriya. In retreat, the two teenagers took a few steps. Blake and Hinji approached them from the sides. Grimes smiled and said, do not do anything stupid. We can do this peacefully or we can hurt you. Momo recognized all three of them and demanded, what are you doing? Do you know who I am? They belong to the security of Taronga. Yes, we do young miss. Now we have our orders to bring him to Mr. Taronga. Please do not force us to restrain you as well. Just walk away. Grimes replied with a desperate voice. Her father was aware that all three of them would face harsh punishment if the young girls suffered any harm. They would most likely be killed by Taronga. Izuku smiled savagely and said, it is okay, Momo. I will deal with these idiots. He released her hand and stepped a few feet away, saying, I have been wanting to see if all my exercise has improved you know what. He spread his arms wide and said, activate. He felt the Guyver armor slap onto him from the back of his neck. He heard the familiar exhaust blow out from close to his mouth as he exhaled. He is now prepared to defend himself, standing tall and proud. Grimes focused on his own quirk and said, bad move runt. Do it boys. He could feel his muscles growing. He looked over and saw the cement beneath Hinji crack and Blake's skin turn to granite. The latter had recently reached several tons of body mass, which boosted his natural strength as well. He lunged at the armored teenager and said, take him. Izuku leapt back and gave Grimes a roundhouse kick, nailing the side of his face. Grimes was surprised to find that it hurt a lot. Blake tried to grab Izuku, but Izuku backflipped and finished the kick. He slammed both feet against Blake while he was in midair. The other bruiser was knocked backward onto a trash can. He fell on it, crushing it. Hinji took a step toward the kid in armor, but when Izuku delivered a right uppercut to the brute, Hinji fell back. Grimes used his right hand to adjust his chin. The child was stronger than he had anticipated thanks to the Guyver armor. He stomped forward and attempted to grab the child again as Blake approached from behind. With enough force to send both of them flying back into their van, the child grabbed Blake's right arm and flipped him, slamming the other arm right into Grimes. Momo gazed wide-eyed as Izuku, now Guyver, hammered the three men as though they were insignificant. Now, all three of them moved in the direction of Izuku, determined to stop attempting to defeat the armored kid. As she watched two of them draw long metal batons, she could see the bloodlust in their eyes. Grimes snarled and said, "Okay kid, we tried to do it the easy way. Now you get hurt." Three more men appeared out of nowhere from around the corner as he said into his radio, "Backup deploy." With his hands on Momo's breasts, one of them hefted her up after grabbing her from behind. Donovan grinned broadly and said, "You like that don't you bitch? Having a real man touching your tits." He reminded Momo of the guard who had attempted to eject Izuku from the building the other day. Rather than fight, Momo made a tiny dispenser. I raised it and aimed it directly at the large idiot's face, spraying his eyes with the entire can of pepper spray. Donovan screamed and let her go. He yelled, "You fucking bitch," and gave Momo a blind slap across the head. He shouted, not as loudly as Izuku, "Now I am really going to hurt you." Before, furious, Izuku snatched the two men who were coming at him by the shirt fronts, jerked them up until their feet were just inches off the ground, and then slammed them into each other so hard that they were both knocked out. Now stomping in the direction of the brute who had the audacity to strike Momo. Izuku put his left hand on the brute's throat and slammed him against the wall behind him before the bigger man could respond, keeping him a few inches away from the sidewalk. He snapped his right arm, causing a single blade to protrude. Izuku growled and drove the blade 3 inches away from the man's balls. Donovan tried to scream, but he was having trouble breathing, so he grabbed the arm with both hands in an attempt to free himself. "I will cut off your nuts and jam them down your throat if you ever touch my Momo again." Izuku yelled angrily, dragging the blade upward. The concrete was easily cut like butter with a hot knife. Donovan sobbed as he saw the razor-sharp blade get closer to his balls. Izuku said, "Gurgle if you understand," and Donovan nodded while gurgling, looking in utter terror at the armored object in front of him. In fact, he nearly urinated on himself and peed his pants. Izuku relaxed his hold on the man's throat and lowered the bigger man. After retracting the blade, the man was struck in the face with such force that teeth flew out. As the others gaped at him in disbelief, he dropped the unconscious man and turned to face them. Both blades snap out downward. When he said, "Okay, who is next?" 3 of them retreated, and the 2 on the ground began to crawl. Before someone was gravely harmed, High Above All Might decided it was time to put an end to this. He landed after leaping from the building. When the new voice said, "I am here," everyone turned to look at All Might, who had just landed a few feet away. The greatest hero grinned broadly and said, "I suggest that you 5 surrender or I might have to let that boy finish what you started." Having observed the battle from above, he had a suspicion that it would go on. At least one of the attackers would be killed or gravely injured. The kid was too strong for them. He gave the order, "Stand down, young Midoriya." 4 of them raised their hands in the air in instant obedience. The leader gave a headshake. Grimes, confident that he could use deceit to achieve his goal, said, "You have no idea what is going on. He is possession of property that belongs to Yau Industries. We are only here to retrieve that property," overlooking a crucial detail. While still sitting on the ground, Momo angrily declared, "Well, I am Momo Yaoyorozu, the property does not belong to my family's company. It belongs to Izuku Midoriya's." Momo then scowled at the 3 men. "Oh, by the way, all 3 of you are fired, and trust me, in this Taronga will not be able to help you. Because when I am done he will be not only fired, but in jail," she said with an angry tone. With his right hand reaching down to assist her in standing up, Izuku pulled back the armor and moved toward her. Momo accepted the hand that was extended and let him assist her in standing, punching him lightly in the arm right away. He gazed at her bewildered. She firmly stated, "That is for thinking I needed protection." She then took hold of his shirt and drew him in. She put her lips to his while tilting her head. She kissed him, and he gasped in complete surprise. She smiled and parted slightly as she counted to 12. She muttered, "That is for caring about me," letting him go and taking a step back to see his face flush red. She gave the police the order to arrest all three of them when they showed up a minute later. One of the officers approached Izuku while wearing handcuffs. The officer was stopped by All Might. All Might turned to face Izuku after saying, "That is not necessary." Young Midoriya only fought in defense. Those there attacked him first. "That young man has a very impressive quirk." "Very impressive," he said. With his hands on his hips, he gazed down at the two teenagers and said, "I think you two need to give an explanation." "Sir, is it possible to wait until tomorrow?" All Might nodded and smiled broadly as Momo asked. "We were on our way for our first official date." She retook Izuku's hand in hers, not wanting anything to get in the way of their actual date because she had waited long enough and did not want any more delays, even though she did rush it a little by kissing him. "It would be acceptable." Izuku let out a sharp sigh and said, "I will stop by the beach tomorrow for the explanation." All Might leapt to his feet and vanished. "What's wrong?" Momo inquired, and Izuku gave a shrug. "I neglected to request an autograph from him," Izuku said, mockingly frustrated. "Now I will have to wait until tomorrow." Momo grinned and laughed a little. "Oh, what a fanboy you are. But that's okay. I like fanboys," Momo said, leaning in to give him another quick kiss while delightedly observing his face turn bright red again. "Okay, on to our first date." She led him down the street. 0. Katsuki Bakugo was actually furious after witnessing the altercation across the street. That fucking Deku. He acted as though he had no quirk all this time. He became enraged and wanted to confront Deku right away, but he chose to wait until the police left because he didn't need their help or a potential black mark on his record, and he had an exam for the hero-written exam in a month and didn't need to justify his arrest. 0. Martin Taronga growled and turned to face his security force's second-in-command, saying, "Pack up everything," after realizing that someone else had witnessed the encounter. He gave the order, then turned to Hinjo-chin, saying, "We have to leave here in 20 minutes. Make sure you take copies of all the research. Get it moving." Knowing that Grimes would squeal as soon as he could negotiate a good deal with the police, he said sternly, "The police will be here soon, and I for one do not plan on being arrested." He dictated everything Taronga had been doing, including the mass murder of the Red Blades, and while the flunkies followed his orders, Taronga watched the fight again and said, "That armor is extraordinary. What incredible strength. It might be exactly what the master is looking for in the right hands." He muttered, then copied the recording and supervised the others, making sure they made copies of everything while erasing the files. 14 minutes later, Taronga, the special guards, and all of the scientists who worked for him were gone, and it was 8 minutes before the police showed up to take Taronga into custody. 0. Moving Izuku's right arm over her shoulders, Momo sat toward the back of the theater and snuggled against him. She could hear his heart thumping in his chest and had to smile because she could tell he was anxious. "You don't mind this, do you?" He shook his head when she asked him in a low voice. "No," Izuku blurted out, not knowing what to say. Inko had been right, Momo. She would have to basically start everything. She had already done that when she kissed him earlier. She was waiting to talk to him about when he called her his Momo, which made her very happy. She smiled slightly up at him, reached up with her right hand, and gently pushed his face towards her. This time, to her delight, he responded, kissing her back. She licked his lower lip, deepened the kiss, and then thrust her tongue inside his mouth, twisting and twirling it around his. She continued kissing until the movie began. "To respond to your unasked query. Yes, Izuku, I really do like you. May I ask you a question? Do you also like me?" Izuku grinned as Momo whispered to him. Momo snuggled closer to Izuku after he said, "I like you a whole lot." As the two watched the movie, Izuku felt like he was doing cartwheels because he couldn't believe Momo Yaoyorozu liked him in that way. It was mind-boggling that someone so attractive would genuinely like him. He sat through the film with a big smile on his face, not really caring what it was about. Izuku, sitting on the couch in his and his mother's apartment, heard Momo say something he desperately hoped he would never hear. "I want you to come over tomorrow and meet my parents." She smiled sweetly at him, and he instantly let out a dejected groan. "Listen, Midoriya, you are coming over and meeting my parents. Their desire has been to meet you." This time, she told him in such a sweet way that Inko started laughing in the kitchen. "Dear, that's the way." Izuku scowled at his mother as Inko said, "Make sure he knows who is boss." Izuku moaned once more and had no other option but to exhale loudly. "Do I have to?" Almost praying for rain, hail, or possibly an alien invasion, he asked sheepishly, hoping that a miracle would occur and the meeting would be called off. You do, indeed, Momo said sharply. My parents have been asking me to bring you, and you are coming if I have to drag you there kicking and screaming. Izuku nodded, and Momo said, tomorrow at 9 a.m., do not be late. After setting the time, she resumed cuddling with her head pillowed on his side and his arm around her shoulders, both of them hearing Inko laughing in the kitchen. It was easier than Izuku had hoped. He arrived at the iron gate, which had a large Y on it, and texted Momo to let him know he was here. When he entered the gym, he saw Momo wearing a K, and he had to admit to himself that she looked extremely beautiful even in a loose-fitting K. An elderly man was teaching her while she performed kicks and punches, and when he saw him, she smiled and waved for him to enter fully. Pay attention, Yaoyorozu, or I will make you redo the whole exercise. The elderly man said sternly. Yes, sensei, Momo said, going back to her exercises. 10 more minutes later, she was finished and bowed to the elderly man, who gave Izuku a stern look. Will you come over so I can meet you, or are you just going to keep staring at me? So this is that special young man that you like, the elderly man said, motioning for Izuku to approach. The older man grinned broadly and remarked, he doesn't look like much. Momo grinned and said, yes, but I still prefer him to everyone else. This is Yomato, Izuku. Yomato began to laugh as she introduced the two, saying, he is my self-defense teacher. You are a bit early, usually my lessons end at 10 a.m. on Saturday. Maybe, Yaoyorozu, your young man would like to spar with you. Izuku chuckled and shook his head when Yomato said, you could use the practice. What? Momo inquired, feeling a little offended by Izuku's recent laughter. Come on, Momo, I'm a boy and you're a girl. You are not nearly as strong as I am. It wouldn't be a fair contest, Izuku said abruptly, then realized he might have just said something inappropriate. Oh my goodness, that resolves that, then. Momo pointed to the middle of the mat and said, get your sneakers off and get ready to get your ass kicked. Izuku shrugged once more and took off his sneakers. Listen, I'm sorry, Momo. Izuku attempted to withdraw from the sparring session, but he reluctantly entered the circle, and Yomato stood to one side, waving his hand. I just don't want to accidentally hurt you, Izuku said. With a resigned exhale, he said, go. Then he watched the fight. Izuku slouched forward and grabbed Momo by the forearms, but before he could do anything more, she broke the hold, grabbed his right arm by the wrist and elbow, and threw him across the mat. She held down his arm after a second. As she applied pressure to his arm, keeping him pinned to the mat, Momo said, tap 3 times if you want up. He grumbled and slapped the mat 3 times, but she leaned down and kissed him on the cheek, smiling, saying, that is once, 2 more to go. She jumped up and he picked himself up off the floor, and Yomato signaled for them to go again, but this time Izuku resisted her attempts to grab him, avoiding her. After a minute, she smiled evilly, saying, did you know you got me pregnant when we kissed? Izuku looked at her in disbelief as she said it so convincingly. What? After he uttered those words aloud, she kicked him in the right side, knocking his feet out from under him. She then grabbed his right arm, wrapped her legs around it, and held his wrist with her right hand. Izuku slapped the mat again after Momo told him, gotcha again. Oh come on Izuku, you should know that a girl cannot get pregnant by just kissing. Izuku stood up and said, that was cheating. Yomato laughed at how she had diverted Izuku and said, no such thing young man, it distracted you which gave her the opening she needed. One more try or do you give up? Izuku nodded when he asked. All right, I was mistaken. Izuku scowled and said, it's a little embarrassing that you beat me so easily. Momo moved in closer and gave him a shoulder bump. Come on, Izuku, you shouldn't be embarrassed by it. Since I was 5 years old, I have been training. Momo gave him a charming smile and said, remember, I want to be a hero someday, and learning to fight hand to hand is necessary. Yaoyorozu, if he feels the same way, Yomato said, then maybe he needs to be trained too. Momo and Izuku shook their heads. Momo said, no, I don't think he needs any martial arts training, sensei. Yomato scowled, adding, I have an idea, we both don't know what fighting style the Guyver gives you. Izuku finally smiled as she suggested, perhaps you could show my sensei and he might be able to tell. It seems like a smart idea. Yomato took a few steps away from Momo and said, activate. He felt the armor eject out the back of his neck and slap onto him, and his eyes widened in shock. Because I have no training in martial arts, so I have no idea why I can do what it does, Izuku said. What the fuck? This is the Guyver you told me about, said Yamato, holding back his oath. Alright, young man, show me. He pointed to one side and said, there's a fighting peg board and a punching bag right over there. Izuku stepped up to the bag first, and Guyver kicked it high and low with his right leg before twisting in midair and kicking it with his left, causing the bag to burst into pieces. He then stepped over to the fighting peg board and, using his hands and elbows, he quickly broke it down into splinters in a matter of seconds. After deactivated the armor, Izuku turned around and saw Yamato beaming broadly. So, what are your thoughts, sensei? Yamato spun toward Momo, giggling with delight, as she asked. That combined every style and technique I'm familiar with, as well as maybe a few I'm not. What does this mean, do you know? Momo shrugged when Yamato asked an exciting question. Historians have been trying to find the origin of martial arts for a very long time, and that Guyver might be the source, Yamato said. According to what you told me, the Guyver is very old. It's possible that another Guyver taught others its martial art in the distant past, or perhaps this one taught others, and it developed into the various styles. Yamato sat down and appeared to be about to faint. So, how can we learn? Yamato gave Izuku a smile as he asked. That's easy. I have to ask some of the historians I know to look at your style. They will determine whether or not what I suspect is accurate. Could you please provide me with evidence of the Guyver's age, Yaoyorozu? That would be helpful. Before she could respond, Yamato stood up and moved toward the door, leaving them both a little perplexed. Izuku leaned down to pick up his sneakers and said, well, that was interesting. Momo shook her head and laughed. Well, it's getting late and after being totally humiliated I think I might head for home. Nice try. She smiled and put her hands on her hips. Wait a minute, I'll change and take a shower. After saying, then, my dear, you are meeting my parents, Momo walked toward the locker room, stopped, and stepped closer. She whispered, you get more if you behave yourself. She then went to get cleaned up and returned a few minutes later, dressed in blue shorts and a white V-neck t-shirt. After removing the mat, she put on a pair of sandals and took his right hand in her left, interlacing her fingers. Observing his expression, Izuku grimaced. Yeah right, Izuku complained as she escorted him out the door, thinking that neither of her parents would be overly happy that a nobody like him was dating their daughter because she was far above his league, not only because she was gorgeous but also because she was wealthy, intelligent, and, well, outstanding in every way. Then there was him, who was essentially a nerd, had no money, and the Guyver had merged into him simply because he was in the right place at the right time. Otherwise, he was what Kachan had always called him, Deku the Worthless. He walked with grim reluctance, fully expecting her parents to approve of her dating him. Izuku entered the enormous house, which was bigger than his and his mother's apartment. Momo pointed to 3 doors on the opposite walls from the entrance, saying, that one goes to the south end of the house, that one there the east, and that last one is the north. She then led him through the north door, past a number of smaller rooms, and into an opulent living room with a 100-inch television on one of the walls. A man and a woman were seated in 2 large, cushioned chairs, and Izuku recognized them right away. The man said, so you finally deemed to bring your boyfriend that we can meet him. Momo promptly corrected her father by correcting him. He's not my boyfriend, Dad. The elder Yaoyorozu stood up as Momo firmly said, we are only dating. Her mother laughed. You young man, don't be intimidated by my husband. He still believes that Momo is too young to be dating yet. I'm sorry, but he's your friend and he's a boy. Her mother, who thoroughly enjoyed making fun of the 2 teenagers, said, so why not just put the 2 together? With a broad smile. Her father glared at Izuku and remarked, I would prefer to think of him as someone that wants to do unspeakable things to my little girl. I apologize, we're being impolite. I'm Keiko, and the man there who seems a little irate is Miyagi, the father of my husband Momo. You are Izuku Midoriya, her mother Keiko said sweetly before turning to face one of the other doors. Come Momo, let us get the tea so when we come back we all can have a nice long chat. She led Momo out the door, where she saw the 2 Yaoyorozu women go and felt the urge to activate the Guyver before making her getaway. She turned to face Momo's father and saw that the older man was still glaring at him. So, what do you intend to do with my daughter, Midoriya? Miyagi sternly asked, motioning for Izuku to take a seat across from him. Sitting, Izuku prayed to any god who would hear him and grant him a miracle. Izuku swallowed nervously and thought, Come on, alien invasion. Nothing but honorables, sir, he said, hoping that would be the end of it, but the elder man got up instead. Young man, let me tell you exactly what's on my mind. As you can see, Momo is my only child, and I feel a strong need to keep her safe. Therefore, I want to make sure that my daughter only ever dates the right kind of person. Someone who isn't attracted to her due to her physical characteristics. I mean, if you understand. Boys and young men have flocked to her since she blossomed at the age of 13, attempting to establish a physical connection with her. There is the door right there if that is the only reason you are with her. He changed his direction and began to walk in front of Izuku. I'm not a sir. She is the reason I like her. She is thoughtful, kind, and a wonderful friend. Izuku answered, I actually never had a friend like her before. Miyagi gave a quick smile before returning to his prepared speech. What gives you the impression that you are worthy of dating or becoming her friend? Izuku closed his eyes in response to Miyagi's question, but when he opened them, Miyagi noticed faint tears in those green eyes. I'm far from adequate. Momo is far above my level. She is smart, attractive, and far too good for me. I have no idea why she even likes me. Izuku lamented. Looking back, I am nothing compared to her, and Miyagi burst out laughing. Untrue. Miyagi returned to his chair and said, I think you're good enough for her to be with. Did Momo tell you that Keiko was a model? Izuku nodded, and the older man went on, it was a supermodel at the time, not just any model. I was a low-level executive living in a tiny studio apartment because I was so indebted. She seemed to like me, even though we only met by chance in an elevator. Liked me enough to invite me to dinner. He leaned in Izuku's direction and continued to laugh a little. Let me tell you something about women. Unfortunately, I believe that Momo has her sights set on you, Izuku. She wants you as her first boyfriend, and for a father that can be devastating. He exhaled sharply and said, it does not matter what the men look like really. If a woman wants someone, they will make sure they get that man, and it does not matter what you look like or are. He then laughed once more, leaning back as the door opened. 0. In the kitchen, Keiko filled the oriental teapot with steaming hot boiling water while grinning broadly at Momo as she added the special herbal blend tea. Her mother said, I can see why you like him, dear, he is so cute. Momo knew her mother was giving away too much. Momo tried not to smile as she said, yes, he is. You really like him, don't you? And I'm not referring to the fact that you were dating him as a friend. Do you want to date him for the first time? I bet you don't know how to do that, right? Keiko asked her daughter, observing the red rims touching Momo's face. Yaoyorozu, who was younger, nodded. She nodded once more. In general, boys of that age are as naive as they can be. I advise you to simply express your desires to him. If he agrees, that's it. Momo grinned and chuckled. His mother told me precisely that, you know. Momo said, I would have to basically tell him what I want, and Keiko chuckled. It seems about correct. I must meet his mother, you know. Keiko couldn't help but laugh aloud when she saw her daughter's shocked expression. Maybe we can compare notes on getting you two together. I'm kidding. Momo opened the side door and they both saw her father leaning away from Izuku. Come, dear, by now your father probably is reading your boyfriend the riot act. But I would like to eventually meet his mother, she said, holding the tray in her hands. Fortunately for Izuku, the remainder of the evening proceeded without incident. After answering a few personal questions, Momo was given permission to show him the rest of the house. He became a little exhausted as they approached the third floor. How do you find your way in a house this big? Momo grinned and shrugged as he gasped and took deep breaths. I suppose I'm accustomed to it. Let's sit here for a minute or so, and then I'll show you the rest. Momo took a seat on a nearby loveseat, and Izuku joined her. She glanced at him and saw that he was focused on something, or worried about something, and she thought, is something wrong? In the hopes that her father had not frightened him away from her, she asked. He swallowed, and she could see that he was very anxious, before turning to face her and taking another deep breath. I wasn't hoping, but I was wondering thinking. Okay, wondering is probably the best word on this. Izuku said anxiously, stuttering and stammering slightly. Which was confusing Momo completely. Swallowing again, his hands began to shake and he felt like he was about to faint. I want to be your boyfriend. He blurted out quickly and Momo stared at him in shock. Then a small smile creased her mouth as she threw her arms around his neck. Pulling him towards her with a delighted squeal. Latching her mouth onto his, kissing him hard and partially grinding their teeth together. After several minutes, she parted and leaned her forehead against his. "Does that mean yes?" She grinned widely as he whispered. "Yes, that means yes," Momo whispered back, kissing him once more and putting her tongue in his mouth. Sometimes Momo lost control of her quirk, usually when she was sleeping or experiencing emotional turmoil. She felt something fill her right hand as she kissed Izuku, and she decided not to let him see it until she was certain it wasn't something embarrassing. "We better get going or we could be seen here," she said to him, and they stood up. When he paused to look at a painting, she looked down at her hand quickly, putting her left hand to her mouth in shock, then quickly calming herself so he wouldn't notice her embarrassment. "Hormones. Fuck, I can't believe that was produced by my subconscious." When she exhaled and smiled mischievously at the thought of accidentally creating a condom while they were kissing, she thought, "We are far from even thinking about doing that." She made sure to control her mind and her hormonal body after the tour, not wanting to unintentionally create another condom and most definitely not wanting him to witness her do so. 0. Martin Taronga complained angrily in the new secret lab, which was filthy, smelled of rat feces, and had spider webs all over it. To make matters worse, all of the mercenaries had quit, and since he lacked Yaoyorozu's funding, he was unable to pay them, so they simply left, leaving him and Shin alone. "This place is disgusting and it will not be acceptable," Taronga said, and the one in the corner of the room laughed hysterically. "What are you anticipating? The Four Seasons." The shadow in the corner drifted closer and sort of took the shape of a man. "This is as best as we can do," Shigaraki Tamura said, grinning and waving his hands in the air for emphasis. "You are a wanted man. The police have orders to arrest you on sight." "Professor Taronga, Shigaraki Tamura is correct. You will have to get by in this place for the time being," Kurogiri said. "We might be able to find you a more suitable location later." Taronga scowled even more. "Now tell us about the Guyver and why you risked your posting at Yau Industries because it is so damn important," Tamura asked, dusting off a nearby chair and taking a seat. "By the way, that was something that took us a lot of work to arrange." "All right, so we were unaware that it was an armored weapon at the time. I was certain that it was a power source of some kind." "Well, I was wrong. The video demonstrating its combat potential has been shown to you. I think it should be in the right hands or with the right person." Taronga's statement, "Pure and simple gentleman, it is something that could possess the power to kill All Might," caught Tamura's full attention as she explained that the Guyver could be a very important asset. Tamura smiled savagely and said, "Then we need it. It are the boy that has it. Personally, I believe that having him join us would be the best course of action because he already demonstrates potential when using it." Taronga nodded and grinned. "If you are able to get him to join us, would it be possible for you to bring Momo Yaoyorozu as well?" "All for One did promise me that I could have her," Taronga said, his eyes gleaming. Tamura rolled his eyes and nodded, indicating Kurogiri to take them both back to their own hideout, once they were safe in the League of Villains headquarters. "You're not really going to give him that girl, are you?" As he regained his appearance, Kurogiri asked, and Tamura sat down in his favorite chair and shook his head. "Despite my many facets, I will not support a pedophile's desire. No, the master explained to me that Taronga's twisted obsession with that Momo Yaoyorozu will not tarnish our cause," Tamura said, taking off his hand mask and grinning maniacally. "I was actually told that once he does what we need done, I have been given permission to end him." He pictured himself killing the idiot by touching Taronga's neck with all of his fingers. "For the time being, let's talk about recruiting for a small diversion that we need to undertake to the UA school." As Kurogiri started making some crucial phone calls, he leaned back in his chair and said, "I suspect we will need as many as we can muster." 0. Taronga lay down on his cot back at the other building after a long day of trying to clean, but it would take at least a week to make the place livable. He closed his eyes and dreamed of touching Momo Yaoyorozu's soft skin in his hands, tasting her petal-soft lips on his own, and finally being in bed with her. He had to stop thinking about that or he would never be able to fall asleep. He had to clear his mind and focus on more important things, such as Tamura's plan to recruit Midoriya into the league. After a short while, he fell asleep, dreaming of Momo, as he had done nearly every night since he first met her. Izuku threw the remaining junk into the back of the dump truck while grinning broadly. After more than 2 months, he had finally finished cleaning the entire beach. He admired his increased muscle as he flexed his right arm. Momo gazed at the beach and remarked, not bad at all, is he?" Izuku said, Thanks Em. Now hopefully they won't mess it up. He sat down, and she soon followed. This meant seeing Cynthia once more and undergoing additional testing. Later I will check to see if all this work did any good with the Guyver. Next week is the practical exam. You should ace it. I wish I had to take it with you, but I received a recommendation. So I do not have to take the practical. I bet if we asked All Might he would give you one. Momo suggested and Izuku nodded. He stood and grinned at her, saying, no. I want to take it. It would give me a chance to see if all this work did improve the Guyver. She gave him a big smile when he said, okay, I take a shower and then take someone special out to lunch. Say that new fast food place down the street. Standing, she accepted his offered hand and they returned so he could get cleaned up. Sounds like a good idea. 0. Izuku took the train by himself the following week. Momo wanted to see how he performed on the practical exam, so she had promised to meet him at the UA. He looked around the rail car and noticed people he thought might be taking the practical exam as well. He glanced at one. She had horns, yellow eyes with black irises, and pink skin and hair. In his opinion, she was a very attractive girl in a unique way. She gave him a pleasant smile after noticing that he was staring. He realized that he could really annoy Momo if she discovered that he was seeing another girl, so he thought, uh-oh, I better be careful. The girl got up from her chair and walked to the other side of him. Izuku realized then that he was in serious trouble. The pink girl sat down and continued to smile at him, saying, hi. I saw you looking at me. Izuku nodded in response to her question, are you on your way to take the practical exam? In an attempt to hide the fact that he was staring at her, Izuku said, yes. I am sorry if I appeared to stare at you. He found her differences fascinating, but that was the only reason. She shook her head and giggled. Her smile was so big that Izuku felt his face getting hot. That is all right. Everyone stares at me at first. I think it is mainly due to the fact that I am such a hottie that they cannot help but stare. She kept smiling, and Izuku couldn't help but smile back. I am kidding. People stare because my quirk has altered my skin tone. I get my horns from my dad. She repeated her question, so are you on your way to the UA too? And he nodded. The girl continued to smile despite Izuku's response, yes. I am meeting my girlfriend there. The pink girl took his hand and shook it after he introduced himself, saying, I am Midoriya, Izuku Midoriya. Izuku could identify with Mina's slight digression, Mina Ashido. You can call me Mina. I really hate referring to others by their last name. Odd custom that should have been dropped decades ago. Sometimes he did that. Izuku grinned as she said, sorry, we just moved back to Japan recently. So I got to get used to how it is here again. Izuku said, that's okay. So, may I ask what your quirk is? Mina turned her palm up, and a tiny pool formed. Izuku couldn't help but laugh when Mina said, I can create acid in my hands and feet. I can also spit it, but that is totally disgusting. Imagine me spitting on a criminal. I bet there would be a lawsuit for that. With a less broad smile than before, she stated bluntly, so you have a girlfriend? Izuku answered, yes, her name is Momo, and she is meeting me at the UA. Mina grinned widely again. They kept talking until someone else took a seat beside Mina, causing Izuku to continue staring. He could not see the girl at all, but the outline of clothes said it was a girl. She didn't exist. Mina turned to the invisible girl and said, oh hi Toru. She pointed to Izuku, and the other girl's sleeve lifted in his direction. Toru Hagakure, this is Izuku Midoriya. He is on his way to the UA practical exam too. As Izuku shook the invisible hand, Toru said, hey Izuku, I see you met Mina. I should apologize to you in advance for anything she might have said that you might feel as embarrassing. Toru and Mina both laughed as Izuku said, well in truth I sort of stared at her first. So I guess it is my fault. The rest of the way they conversed. When they arrived at the station, Izuku got up and got his bag. They both wished him luck when he said, I guess I will see you two at the exam. Good luck. As he left, he noticed Momo was waiting. Toru touched Mina's arm as she got off the train. Mina shook her head as Toru whispered, oh tell me that you got his phone number. If so I want it too. Mina whispered back, nope, he has a girlfriend. She pointed to the spot where Izuku approached a very pretty girl. Toru expressed disappointment, saying, well shit. That sucks, he is really cute and, well it just sucks. Strolling together in the direction of UA's entrance. As they both watched Izuku and the girl enter the UA campus, Mina responded, "Tell me about it. Why is the good ones always have girlfriends already?" They ceased holding hands once they were inside, observing the posted guidelines that prohibit anyone from making public displays of affection on school property. 0. Momo felt a twinge of jealousy as soon as she saw the two girls who had traveled with Izuku on the train. However, it subsided when she joyfully saw how affectionately he was staring at her. After persuading Midnight and Eraserhead that he was eligible to take the practical exam, which he accomplished by transforming into the Guyver, Izuku was permitted to sit for the test. Izuku cut through 4 of the point-level robots at a moderate speed. Each one was completely cleaved by both blades, leaving them in 2 or more pieces. He was doing all right. He jumped back when he heard a rumbling, and a huge robot suddenly materialized in front of him and the others. Izuku kept taking steps back as it lumbered toward him. He was waiting for a chance to pass the robot quickly and keep eliminating those who would grant him the necessary number of points. Toru shouted over the din, "Someone help me. Mina's leg is caught under a block of concrete." Mina's leg was pinned beneath the concrete block, which she herself pushed against. Izuku knew he wouldn't reach them in time, so he ran in their direction. Then he sensed a weird accumulation of something in his chest. There was a crackle of energy and an odd beeping sound. He put his hands on his chest plates and stepped in front of Mina and Toru. Then, much to his surprise, a blast of power shot out of his chest and hit the huge robot squarely in the middle. He wondered what was going on as the energy poured out of him. After the blast was over, he gazed at the robot's center's 12-foot hole. He replaced his chest plates with a snap. His gaze shifted to the two girls, removing the concrete from Mina's leg with ease. Izuku asked, "Are you all right?" And Mina got up with Toru's help, applying weight to her leg cautiously. "It looks like nothing is broken. Thank you for saving my ass." Mina grinned gratefully at the armored Izuku. "Now I'm attracted to him." Toru glared at the now demolished trap robot and said, "Yes, thank you. I thought those bigger trap robots were programmed to not actually try to kill us." Tempted to go angry and kick the thing, she grumbled, "Stupid thing tried to crush us." The timer went off before any of them could continue. The test was over. Izuku was worried about this because he had only destroyed 4 robots during that period, which might not have been sufficient to get him admitted to the UA. He turned off the Guyver as he followed Mina and Toru out of the exam location. He pondered the source of the power blast that erupted from his chest. Was it a weapon of some kind, an ultimate weapon? The whispering between Mina and Toru was not audible to him. Mina whispered to her friend, "Okay, if he ever breaks up with his girlfriend, I get first go at him." Toru winced, but she knew Mina couldn't see her face. Both of them turned to face Izuku and grinned as Toru whispered back, "No way. It does not matter, you saw him first. It is the first one to get him will decide that." Momo waited with a frown outside the exam area. Observing from the spectator room, she was aware that Izuku had fallen short of her expectations. He might not be able to get into the school with just 4 minor point robots. He wouldn't have wasted time if he hadn't gone to assist the two girls. The enormous power blast that came from his chest, however, was what caught her attention about the fiasco. It was disastrous, immediately vaporizing a significant amount of the robot's center mass. Izuku let out a slow, regretful breath. "I am sorry, M. I guess I won't be attending with you at the UA." Momo grinned at him and said she wasn't concerned about the rules of UA just yet. She hugged him, putting her arms around his waist. "It is okay, Izzy. Maybe you can apply to one of the other schools and then I will transfer there too." Momo replied with reassurance. Izuku gave a headshake. Izuku put his own arms around her and hugged her back, saying, "No. You always wanted to attend the UA. I cannot let you go somewhere else. Not because of me." He accompanied her to the exit, saying, "Come on, we better leave before you get into trouble before you even attend here." In about a week, the school would send the results, and Izuku would know he had failed. Momo was still debating the transfer and thought it would be best if she watched him. It appeared that he attracted the attention of other girls everywhere he went, and she was unable to permit it. Getting off the ground, Momo led him to the various dinners that were close to the UA school and said firmly, "Get this through your head, Izzy. I am going to transfer wherever you go and nothing you say is going to change my mind. Now I think you need to take me to dinner so we can discuss which other schools you want to apply to." Izuku chose not to argue with Momo. being aware that no matter what he said, she would not reconsider transferring. 0. Iwaza gazed widely at the sensors in the control room. With a sensual lip lick, Midnight remarked, "That was unexpected. That type of power is unprecedented." On one side, All Might grinned widely, not expressing his own awe at the power show. As if he was aware that Izuku Midoriya possessed that kind of power. Yes, it was. So the malfunction of the trap robot worked out after all. We had the opportunity to witness just how powerful young Midoriya's armor actually is. All Might said with a tone of pride. In the hopes of inspiring Midoriya to take action to demonstrate the Guyver's strength, the teachers set up the robot to disregard its programming. Instead of using some kind of weapon that not only vaporized the robot's center but also struck 3 buildings behind it, they were expecting him to charge forward and show off his strength. All Might nodded in response to Midnight's question, "So you still think that he would be the one that someday could be considered an acceptable replacement for you?" Every teacher was aware of his waning abilities. He would soon have to find someone to share one for all with. He initially thought Midoriya would be fine, but he knew her father would not be happy with the idea, so he had to move on to his next option. However, that did not ensure that the next one for all holder would meet the requirements to be the #1 hero and the symbol of peace. It was both a blessing and a curse in different ways for someone who didn't have a quirk, setting a clear goal for the person who possessed one for all. All Might got up and walked to the door, saying, "Yes. I have to go for a few days. It's time for me to choose another to pass one for all on to." He addressed the only person in the tiny room who was not talking, saying, "If she accepts, I would suggest that she be admitted to Class 1A. The mouse-like principal raised his teacup and gave him a look. Before taking a sip of his tea, Principal Nezu said, "I will arrange it, All Might." With a snap of her whip, Midnight caught everyone's attention. Midnight questioned, "You never said who it was that you were going to ask to accept all for one." "So who is it?" Iwaza gazed curiously at All Might, curious to find out too. All Might scowled, sighed, and grinned at them. "An old friend's daughter. Her name is Melissa Shields and I believe that she might be the only one that I know of that would be acceptable to pass all for one on to. I was reluctant to ask her, since I did not want her to bear the weight that I would bestow upon her. But at this point I have no other choice." All Might responded and began to leave the space. He was terrified that he was going to ask someone so important to him to risk her life for the rest of her days. Date night. Staying up late. Inko Midoriya grinned as she watched them from the kitchen. The 2 teenagers were watching TV while seated on the couch. Momo held her son's right hand in her right while her head was nestled against his, and his arm was drooping over her shoulders. She took his hand in hers loosely. With her feet tucked under her, Inko was certain that the young girl appeared to be at ease enough to nod off at that very moment. It was late, and she had called Momo's mother to get the others to let Momo sleep on the couch. "I think I might go to bed. Now you two behave yourselves." She left the door partially open and went to her own room, saying, "That means in another hour, Izzy you go to your room and Momo you stay on the couch. Any funny stuff and there will not be any more sleepovers." Izuku said, "Maybe we should call it a night, Em. It has been a long day." Momo tightened her grip on his hand, not wanting to let him go just yet, but feeling at ease. Cuddled up against him felt too good for her. She had already assured her mother that neither of them would engage in any physically demanding activities when she inquired about staying at the Midoriya's apartment for a night or longer. That neither was yet prepared for sexual activity. Her mother was adamant about giving her the talk once more. Her mother had given her the talk 4 times before. She was 13 the first time, 14 the second, and now twice more. Emphasizing the value of holding off until she was old enough to comprehend the repercussions. Momo closed her eyes, exhausted, and fell asleep a few minutes later. Izuku started to gently take her arm off of him when he realized she was sleeping, and he then made an equally gentle attempt to get to his feet, intending to fully assist her in lying down on the couch. Instead, she gripped him more tightly, which didn't work. He let go of his hand and encircled his waist with both arms. Momo squeezed him and whispered, "Don't go. Not yet. Let me hold you and you hold me." Izuku had no choice but to comply with her whispered request, "Stay with me for just a little while." He smiled slightly and reached over to pull a nearby throw over both of them. She went right back to sleep. He also fell into a light sleep a few moments later. She didn't wake up until she shoved him to lie down, resting her head on his chest and everything else beside him. Inko went to see how they were doing at around 1 in the morning. She couldn't resist grinning. She didn't have the heart to wake either of them because they looked so happy and adorable together. Deciding that it was okay as long as they were sleeping and not doing anything else. Grabbing her phone and snapping a brief photo of them. Went back to sleep after that. Izuku woke up early in the morning and gazed lovingly at Momo's contented, sleeping face. She eventually woke up too and grinned up at him. She leaned up to give him a gentle kiss while whispering to him, "I never slept so soundly and comfortably before." He laughed as he parted. The woman grimaced at him and said, "Would I kiss you and you laugh?" Izuku wrinkled her nose and said, "No, it is not that. Your hair, it looks like you got caught in a windstorm." She grinned once more as he said, "But I have to admit, even a mess you were really beautiful in the morning." Going back to give him another kiss. She slipped her tongue into his mouth this time, slipping a little over him. In moments like these, she had to focus on not making anything. Or she might make another mistake. She didn't want her subconscious or hormones to unintentionally produce a condom once more. Yes, she gave it some thought during their passionate kiss. When they were kissing and he was holding her so tightly against him, it was difficult to resist the urge to have sex. Glaring down at the two teenagers, Inko remarked, "Ahem. I think you two need to show some restraint." As Momo slipped from on top of Izuku and got off the couch, she firmly said, "I allowed you two to sleep on the couch, but I am not about to allow you two to continue doing that." She tried not to laugh at them as she asked, "Okay, who wants breakfast?" She had observed that they were both flushed with shame at being in such a humiliating circumstance. 0. Taronga looked into a microscope in another makeshift laboratory. Taronga asked his sole helper, "Did you see this chin?" And the other man nodded. The man nodded once more. "Do you understand what this means?" Taronga scowled at the other, and Chin replied, "Yes, Professor. It means that your hope of removing the Guyver and using it is no longer possible." Leaning back from the lab table, Taronga said, "I know it's true, but it's in his blood. Microscopic nanites. What that tells me is that even if I took the Guyver away from him, it wouldn't work on anyone else." When Chin asked, "Should we tell Tomuro about this discovery?" Taronga shook his head. Taronga firmly said, "No. Not until he brings me what I want, then I might tell him." He was upset that Tomuro hadn't shown him Momo yet. No longer giving a damn about whether or not Midoriya was brought in. He only wanted Momo, and he would stop telling Tomuro about his discoveries until he had her. Chin scowled before returning to their analysis of the remaining data they had obtained. Taronga's perverse fascination with a 15-year-old girl was something he detested. A fascination that Chin thought would lead to the death of the other man. Chin had been a little sickened by Taronga's detailed explanations of what he wanted to do to her on multiple occasions in the past. He nearly felt sorry for the insane man. 0. All Might was excited to see his old friend and resented seeing him when he arrived on I-Island. It was up for grabs. He would first present the idea to Melissa's father, David Shields, in the hopes of persuading him of its significance. He would then ask Melissa after receiving permission. However, he would warn her about the risks of accepting, that she might not want the increased responsibility that came with having power. He felt a familiar voice yell, "Uncle Might," as he felt someone shackled to his arms. Holding Melissa high, All Might remarked, "My oh my, how you have grown." She laughed merrily and I smiled up at her. As All Might put her down, Melissa grinned broadly and said, "Dad wanted to be here, but he is in a meeting with the board." She turned and led All Might into a nearby complex, saying, "Come on, he should be just about done by now." As they strolled, I told him what had happened since his last visit. She had dated a boy 3 times in total, including the most recent breakup. They both heard David grumbling loudly as they entered the lab. They are fools, self-indulged fools. Did they not realize the potential of my discovery? David roared. Then he stopped when he saw All Might and his daughter. Melissa worriedly asked, "What is the matter, Daddy?" Her father gave a sharp exhale before grinning. "Oh, it is nothing important, honey, just the council being overly cautious about my latest invention. Eventually they will agree and allow me to continue my work." "So my friend, what brings you to I-Island?" David replied with a grin on his face. All Might stopped grinning as he stepped closer. Melissa grudgingly left after All Might said, "That is something we need to discuss privately." "Could you give us a few minutes, Melissa?" With a shuddering sigh of relief, All Might returned to normal as soon as the door closed. Toshinori Yagi held up his hand before David could ask. The skinny man sat down and said, "No, it is not about this. In fact, it is something even more important than my condition. I need to ask you something vastly important. After 10 minutes, David sat silently across from Miyagi. David leaned back from Miyagi and thought about what All Might was requesting that he permit. I know I am asking a lot, but I will not ask Melissa unless you approve. As he started to consider whether he could manage having so many people attempting to harm his little girl, David said, I have to say that I am tempted to agree, my friend. But I have to voice my concerns. In the time you gained All for One, a great number of villains have made it their life ambition to kill you. I rather not have my daughter have that problem. He exhaled sharply before grinning and saying, it is a lot to ask of me and her. An hour later, All Might gave Melissa one of his hairs to swallow. We need to ask her. I have always let her make her own life choices. If she agrees, then I will support her decision. She had decided to be All Might's successor. The week prior to classes, Izuku held Momo's hand as they entered the apartment, and Inko gave him an envelope from Ua right away. He looked at Momo while holding it in his left hand, still sealed. He said, acceptingly, well, I guess this is my denial letter. This letter would only serve to confirm what they all knew, that he had failed. Momo made an unsuccessful attempt to smile. She only recommended Ua, and the other schools would not allow her to transfer. She was therefore unable to accompany Izuku when he went to another school. Izuku gave Momo the big vanilla envelope as they both sat down heavily on the couch. He said, go ahead and open it. Momo cut the top of the envelope and made a letter opener. A pre-recorded disc being removed, Izuku slipped it into the DVD player and hit play. Congratulations, Izuku Midoriya, you have been accepted into Ua, 1A class. The following information is a complete listing of our rules and regulations, along with instructions that illustrate the classes and training that you will be attending. An unfamiliar voice said while Izuku paused the video. Momo joyfully exclaimed, you got in. As she seized Izuku and gave him a strong embrace. She wanted to cry as she gave Izuku a hug. Izuku questioned in complete shock that it was even possible. How? I mean, I only destroyed 4-point robots. That would mean that all but 19 others were unable to destroy 5 or more. Momo gave a shrug. Izuku concluded that Momo was correct when she told him, who cares? The important thing is I get to attend Ua with my boyfriend and you get to attend with your girlfriend. I for one do not care why they accepted you, as long as you got accepted. When she was denied the opportunity to transfer, they both had a lengthy conversation about it, thinking that they would most likely split up after a while. Since they could still be together, neither of them really wanted that to occur. Momo grabbed the remote control from Izuku just as he was about to press play. I guess you are right. Perhaps the answer is further on this disc. Momo stood up and pulled Izuku up with her, saying, listen to the rest later. I think I need to take you out to celebrate. His mother gave him a hug. After telling them, she is right, Izzy, go out and have fun. Inko gave them a more severe look. Suspecting that this could be a trigger for them to get more physical in their relationship, she added, but not too much fun. Teenage hormones may be impacted by learning something so amazing. The two mothers knew that Momo and Izuku would have 6 after discussing them with Keiko Yaoyorozu. It is indigestible. She and Keiko could only try to prevent them from acting out. However, the two mothers also talked about what might happen in the future. When the two might complete their relationship involving rings and a chapel if they are still together. They spent hours discussing that and the number of grandchildren they anticipated having. They were wise enough not to even allude to that to Momo's father or the young couple. He had yet to accept that Momo had a boyfriend. As they approached, Izuku had Momo in his arm outside. In fact, they had no idea where they were going. I wanted to congratulate him on being accepted into the UA, when a shadow landed in front of them after falling from above. As Momo started to consider what defensive items to make, Izuku stiffened and prepared to transform into Guyver. The voice grinned down at the two teenagers and declared, I am here. Momo let out a sigh of relief and said sharply, All Might. Geez, don't do that. Both of them have been on the lookout for another attempt to kidnap Izuku ever since Taronga's goons made an attempt. Izuku nodded as All Might said, sorry. It is just my thing. I take it you received your acceptance letter, young Midoriya. Good, it is not on the disc. But I wanted to tell you why you were accepted even though you received the lowest score. You see, there is another point value. 100 points for showing the potential of being a true hero. You got those points when you saved Mina Ashido and Toru Hakagir when the trap robot malfunctioned. He clarified, and both Momo and Izuku were unable to truly believe it. Iwaza wants me to remind you two to pay close attention to rules and regulations, adhering closely to those that govern relationships between students of the opposite sex. Momo was grinning. We both know about that, All Might. We know we cannot do anything on school grounds. Momo said. She furrowed her brow in contempt and thought, what do they think? We are going to sneak into a closet and have sex at the school. All Might told them and then took things seriously. I think it's a dumb rule, but when dealing with teenagers, they want to make sure nothing seated happens on school grounds. He moved closer and said, I would like to ask you two a favor. With a mix of surprise and bewilderment, Izuku glanced at Momo before turning back to All Might. Okay. My protege will be attending UA and will be in your class as well. I would like you two to keep an eye on her and perhaps be her friend. She is going to require both. Oh, I should tell you, she is 17 years old and is only be attending the training, not the actual high school classes, since she already graduated high school. All Might stated this to them both. He said, leaping back into the air, good. She will be arriving on Friday, perhaps you can show her around on Saturday. What worried Momo was that it sounded harmless enough. Alright, so this girl was 2 years older and American. She was concerned because it seemed like every girl who met Izuku fell head over heels for him. In addition to the girls on the beach, she recalled the 2 girls at the practical exam, which was another occasion when some girls swooned over him from afar. She had witnessed their glances at him. She experienced intense waves of jealousy every time. Izuku felt compelled to warn them all to keep their hands, eyes, and other objects away from her. As they were walking, Izuku noticed that Momo had not spoken for the past 10 minutes and asked, is there something wrong, Em? Momo said, no, everything is fine, Izzy. She then gave him a comforting smile. Izuku grinned back as she continued, I was just thinking. Momo could only imagine. Izuku said, well, actually I was too. To think All Might wants us to meet his protege. I wonder what she is like. A tinge of jealousy started to seep into her. Momo said, trying not to overthink or overreact, I guess we will find out this Saturday. Izuku nodded as she gestured toward the walk-up order window, saying, let's eat there at the Pasta Palace. On Saturday, Momo found she didn't really need to be concerned about the girl trying to take Izuku away from her after meeting Melissa Shields. Melissa asked them both a number of questions concerning the Guyver, mostly because they had just met. Melissa blushed instantly when All Might proudly said, you will have to excuse Melissa. Her father is David Shields, I am sure you both know him. Well, she inherited his scientific curiosity. My father is in charge of conducting research on the other devices that were found at the temple. Did you know that so far the one that bonded to you is the only one still active and functional? The others are, well, the best word to describe it. They are dead. According to him, the Guyver devices are sentient biological lifeforms that originally were intended as a type of survival suit. Izuku and Melissa were made aware of this. After the first Guyver was found, the excavation of the temple was taken over by the United Nations. Melissa shrugged when Izuku asked, how many more were discovered? No one noticed when All Might just walked away, so she told them, about 20. There was no need to repeat all that he had already been told about the Guyvers. From what I was told by my father, they were all over the interior, tossed about like they were simply discarded. Melissa glanced around. She said, hey, where did All Might go? And the other two followed suit. Momo grinned and remarked, that was rude, he did not even say goodbye. Melissa nodded when she said, I think instead of standing here, why don't we go somewhere that we can get something to eat? Melissa asked, on the way, can you tell me how you activated the device and all about the armor? And Izuku shared with her what he had learned thus far. Melissa shared some personal information with them while they were eating. She had promised herself that she would never tell anyone about All for One. Izuku and Momo also introduced themselves to Melissa. Oh, so you two are a couple. That is really nice. I am between boyfriends at the moment. I only had my last one for about 2 days. He dumped me when he found out that I was not ready to have sex yet. I do not know how it is here, but American boys tend to only think about sex. Momo laughed and grinned. Izuku flushed when Momo said, we have that here too, though there are some good ones that, well, Izzy is one of them. Izuku smiled back, still flushed, and said, that is why I like him so much. Why I fell for him from the beginning. Melissa said, that's good to know. Do you have an older brother? I'd like to have someone who doesn't treat me like a sex object. Izuku shook his head. Well, I guess I will have to keep looking for the good one then. I noticed your expression when I first saw you. I take it that a lot of girls are interested in him. She responded and Momo exhaled and grimaced. Izuku gazed at Momo with wide eyes as she said, yes, it seems that once they meet him and find out how great he is, they want him. Izuku, who was surprised to hear that other people thought he was attractive, said softly, you never told me that. He always thought of himself as a little homely, and he only managed to attract Momo Yaoyorozu by some strange stroke of luck. Momo giggled and asked, are boys as clueless on I-Island? Melissa nodded and giggled too. He grinned broadly as she said, my dear Izzy, why do you think so many girls showed up on the beach when you were cleaning it? It was not for the sunset, they were admiring you. At the time I chased them off. Melissa said, staking your claim on him right. And the two girls burst out laughing once more. Izuku chose to simply listen as the two girls carried on discussing various topics. Respond when asked, and that was that. Melissa went home 5 hours later, and Momo followed suit 2 hours later. They all had to prepare for the first day of classes at the UA on Monday. UA attendance. Initial day and beyond. Momo and Izuku arrived separately and met at the front entrance. This is really going to suck, Izzy. We get to see each other all day and we cannot even hold hands. Momo was grumbling. Others were entering UA as they went by. He was moved to one side by taking his hand. She decided she wanted a kiss before entering the school, even though they weren't yet officially on school property. She leaned over him and kissed him, pressing her lips to his. A giggle came from behind her. She turned to see a smirking pink girl. Mina Ishido grinned and went inside, saying, do not mind me. I think that is really cute. Izuku exhaled loudly and shrugged. Momo reluctantly released his hand as Izuku told her, well, we better go in before we both are late to our first day. Together, they entered the building and made their way to their homeroom. Momo grimaced as they sat in their designated seats. Unless Izuku looked back, there were at least 3 seats between them. They were unable to even exchange glances. Momo muttered to herself, they are not taking anything for granted. She rolled her eyes and turned to see Melissa standing beside her own seat on the right, heroically tugging at the skirt. Melissa scowled when she asked, something wrong, Melissa? Melissa tried to pull the skirt down, saying, this skirt is way too short. If I sit down incorrectly, everyone who looks will see my panties. What type of idiot designed these uniforms? They look like something out of those old XXX movies that some pervert made about Catholic school girls. She said and Momo chuckled. The blonde girl sat down slowly, making sure the skirt did not ride up, after Momo told Melissa, when you sit, keep your knees together and tuck the skirt under you. The desk will block anyone from actually seeing anything. Melissa let out a sigh of relief as she continued, our training uniforms are a lot better and will cover us better. Trust me. Iwaza learned that he was unable to block Midoriya's Guyver armor during the assessment test. That intrigued him and irritated him a little. He therefore required Midoriya to take the test twice for each assessment. Once wearing the Guyver armor, and once not, essentially to assess the variations in performance. Guyver finished the sprint in roughly 5 seconds, but Midoriya took 34 seconds. Guyver threw the sensor ball a mile away and 115 meters away from Midoriya. Iwaza gained an understanding of the Guyver's capabilities with each test. He subsequently informed All Might and Principal Nezu of that information. As one team was the heroes and the other was the villains, the training on the second day involved pairing off with another. Momo was disappointed that she wasn't paired with Izuku. Instead, the short fool continued to look up her short skirt, as she could see from the small, diminutive Minoru Mineta, staring at her ass. They were supposed to target Tenya Iida and Toru Hagakure. She was a little taken aback, though, that Izuku and Katsuki Bakugo were paired together to play the villains, opposing Mina Ishido and Melissa Shields. As she glanced over, she noticed that Iwaza had gotten closer to All Might. Iwaza whispered to All Might, that was a strange pairing you did. The number 1 hero grinned widely. All Might whispered back, I want to really push Melissa. Make her go all. Both teachers turned to face Bakugo and Midoriya. I was not actually referring to Shields and Ishido. But Midoriya and Bakugo, you do know that they do not exactly get along too well. Bakugo has an inner hatred of Midoriya for some reason. Iwaza said with a grin on her face. Knowing which one would most likely suffer harm and it wasn't Midoriya, All Might proposed, putting them two together might stop what might eventually happen. I believe at some point, they are going to fight and one of them is going to get hurt. Speaking to the pupils, he told them, let's get started. You and Bakugo, Midoriya, have 5 minutes to prepare for the heroes. Bakugo and Midoriya then proceeded to the mock training building. Izuku activated the Guyver as he was moving, and it instantly clicked into position. Bakugo turned to face the armored teen after entering. Bakugo glared at the odd object in front of him and said angrily, listen Deku. I do not like this. If it were up to me, I would do this all by myself. So for now stay out of my way. Bakugo glared at Izuku as he strode down the corridor, saying, fine Kachan. Do whatever you want, I will go protect the bomb. Izuku saw that Melissa and Mina could enter the room covertly in at least 4 different ways at the fake bomb. There had to be only one point of entry. The blade slid out as he stepped to the closest door and jerked his right arm downward. He cut the frame with 4 clean cuts, causing an entire wall section to collapse, shutting the door. He followed suit and moved on to the next one. He slid out his left arm blade after the 3rd door and repositioned himself in front of the bomb, observing the fake bomb in silence. Momo grinned proudly in the monitor room at her boyfriend's accomplishment. Momo raised her hand in response to All Might's question, can any of you tell me why Midoriya did that? Greeting Momo, he said, go ahead Yaoyorozu. He has limited Ishido's and Shield's entry points down to 1. They cannot have one of them be a diversion while the other attempts to sneak in and touch the bomb. With only 1 door, they have to come in where he placed himself to block them from the bomb. Momo responded and All Might gave an appraisal. All Might said, exactly. Even if they get past Bakugo, they may have difficulty getting past Midoriya. After that, everyone went back to observe the monitors. 0. It wasn't too difficult to get past Bakugo. Melissa just tore down a nearby wall and used 10%. After that, Mina completely contained Bakugo by melting the steel and cement so he couldn't reach them. He could blow up the barrier, of course, but that might cause that part of the building to collapse on top of him. She grinned at Mina as she ran up the stairs to the next floor. She smiled and Mina smiled back, saying, that was a good idea. Blocking him from being able to stop us. As they ascended the next set of stairs, Mina remarked, thanks, but we have not won yet. Midoriya is not going to be that easy. I have seen the Guyver in action and I can tell you, we are going to have problems getting by him. Melissa nodded when she said, do you think you could keep him occupied, while I try to get to the bomb? However, seeing her in her uniform might cause any typical boy to lose concentration. It cut low across her chest and was incredibly tight, fitting her like a second skin. Displaying a significant amount of her cleavage. When she emerged from the locker room, she was aware that she had drawn some admiring glances from a blonde boy and a very short boy who looked like a child. However, she intended for it to attract attention, utilizing the established research that showed a villain would be more interested in a heroine's outfit than the heroine herself if it was somewhat form-fitting and revealing. All she could hope was that her father would never see her wearing her uniform. He would suffer a heart attack. The majority of the girls in the class wore identical uniforms, which attracted attention even though they weren't particularly practical. When they got close to one of the doors and discovered it was blocked, Melissa said, I will try. She whispered to Mina, he is being sneaky. As they continued, they discovered the lone open, unblocked door. He has probably blocked all but one of the doors. We try busting in, he will be ready to stop us. The armored Guyver was standing in the middle of the room when she looked in. The 2 blades were ready and out. Mina winced and said, we are running out of time. Eventually Bakugo will get through and come in behind us. She wasn't sure if they could both fight their way past Midoriya right now because he looked so formidable. Pulling herself up to her current maximum, Melissa said, okay, I will draw his attention to me, you try to get by him. She was aware that any higher could cause bone fractures. She sprang forward and seized a nearby block of concrete at 15%. She threw it at Midoriya as forcefully as she could, observing as he merely used the blade of his right arm to slice it. Aside from him, it fell in 2 halves. Izuku firmly said, I know you both are there. I would suggest you just give up. You are not getting past me. He then pointed his arm and the blade back down at the ground. In an attempt to burn a hole in the floor and cause Midoriya to fall through it, Mina leapt past Melissa and threw a ball of concentrated acid at his feet. He just took a step back, staying out of their way and away from the bomb. Whispering, Melissa picked up another block and threw it at Midoriya, saying, we have to draw him to us. He cut it in half once more without approaching them. They needed him to move so Mina could pass him. She asked the pink girl, any more ideas? And Mina shook her head. With the blades, neither of them wanted to approach too closely. They therefore had to make an effort to move him aside. Then Mina appeared. Mina smiled and said, almost inaudibly, no, we don't need to move him out of the way. We just need to get past him. Melissa smirked back at her when she asked, how high can you throw me? All they needed to do now was hope that their plan would work. Melissa grabbed Mina by the waist and threw her as hard and high as she could. She then picked up another block and hurled it at Midoriya, unable to stop Mina since the block would hit him if he did. He attempted to stop Mina after slicing through the concrete block. Melissa rushed ahead before he could. She swung a nearby steel girder at him after ripping it off the wall. He drew his gaze back to her while dodging the beam of 8-foot metal. Before he could focus on stopping Mina Ashido again, the room was filled with an amplified voice. As All Might's voice exclaimed, heroes win. Izuku turned to see Mina holding the bomb in her right hand. Izuku grinned, but no one could see him, as he exhaled steam from the vents. Katsuki Bakugo rushed up to him after he was outside. With an angry and disgusted voice, Katsuki screamed, what, you could not stop two girls, Deku? They were girls. Melissa made the decision to speak up in support of Izuku. Katsuki glared at Melissa as she told the irate teenager, if you want to blame someone for being beat, then you should blame yourself. We hemmed you from being able to help him and that gave us the opportunity to distract him and then slip by him. With a growl, Katsuki turned and left, saying, yeah, I just bet he was distracted, complaining about something that no one has heard. However, Kyoka gasped when she unintentionally overheard him. Mina whispered to the earjack quirker, what did he say, Kyoka Jiro? The slender girl shook her head and let out a breath. Jiro whispered back, her face flushed at the mere notion of what that meant. I do not like using those words, but he related that you two are, well, the polite words are that you put out really easily. Mina responded to Katsuki's remark by flipping him the bird right away. As the Izuku turned off the Guyver, Melissa grinned at him. Melissa shook her head in response to Izuku's statement, you did not have to defend me to Kachan. I did screw up and allowed you two to get by me. It is my fault we lost. I think we would have lost if you decided to be more lethal. Think about it, Izuku, you probably could have cut Mina Ashido in half while she was above you. No matter how high in the air I threw her. In truth, if you were an actual villain, me and Ashido would have lost. Melissa said with a nod. Yes, if he had, as most villains do, used deadly force. He and Katsuki would have triumphed then. As she extended her arms and made a full circle, essentially showing him her inappropriate uniform, she asked, I am guessing you really were not distracted because of my uniform, right? Not at all. Izuku smiled slightly in response. Melissa said with a big smile, that is what I thought. You know, Izuku, you got it bad for Momo. She had considered calling him Momo's nickname, but they weren't yet close enough friends to do that. Izuku or Midoriya was the focus for the time being. Momo Yaoyorozu was not M, and neither was Izzy. Before they told her she could, that is. It was time to observe another group of pairs carry out the exercise, so we walked back with the others. Momo slammed another steel beam into place after removing the one that had been created from her chest. Utilizing Izuku's tactic of obstructing the room's entrance. Mineta was staring at her from the side, but she didn't need to look to know it. He opened his mouth and drooled little beads. The short pervert snapped out of his reverie when Momo said sternly, stop staring at my ass and use your sticky balls to stick the beams together. To join the beams, he took a few of his quirk-created balls off his head. She was aware that Toru Hagakure and Tenya Ito would attempt to gain access in order to win in just a few more minutes. She took several bottles of talcum powder from her to counteract Toru's invisibility. Mineta gazed at her bewildered. Mineta took one and followed her instructions to start spraying this in the air. This energized Mineta, who doubled his spraying of the white powder, saying, now if Toru tries to sneak in, we can see her. With a huge perverted smile on his face, Mineta muttered excitedly, so if she does, the powder will attach to her and I will be able to see her naked body. Pouring more into the air with another bottle. As the fine dust started to cover the floor and the rest of the room, they let it float for a few seconds. They were prepared for them now. She noticed barefoot prints on the floor close to the door. She made a medium-sized net and threw it in the direction of the prints. Mineta took the initiative to toss sticky balls onto the net's edges as it draped over the invisible person, securing it to the ground. Desperately looking for a bottle of talcum that might still contain some powder, he rushed over to them, wishing to spray Toru in order to witness the naked girl's splendor. He suspected that he could not ask Momo to make any more, and he realized with disgust that he had used them all. Toru Hagakure, straining against the fiber net, protested, that was so unfair. Attempting to break free, Tenya Iida rushed into the room as the wall on the other side exploded before Momo or Mineta could react. While Momo tried to come up with a plan to prevent Iida from reaching the bomb, Mineta started tossing balls at the intruder. Iida dodged the sticky black balls and lunged at the bomb before she could come up with a plan. I'm touching it. Momo scowled. She was defeated. While Iida had gone around the room and entered through his own door, he fell for a distraction. She grimaced as she heard the broadcast announcing the victory of the heroes. Approaching Toru, he made a pair of scissors to cut the invisible teen free from the net. She went back outside, a little annoyed that she had lost. However, she discovered that she had forgotten to come up with a counter-argument for Tenya Iida. Not anticipating that the stealthy member of that team would be the distraction, I was more concerned that Toru would infiltrate. Ultimately, the outcome was a close call. Either the villains or the heroes. 0. Momo grabbed Izuku's hand as soon as they were outside the main gate and they began to walk in the direction of the train station. When Katsuki Bakugo yelled, "Deku! Stop!" the two came to a halt and turned to face the explosive quirker, who was sprinting in their direction. He glared at Momo as he got closer. Momo shook her head in response to his command, "Leave. I need to talk to Deku for a moment." Bakugo winced as Momo said sharply, "You Bakugo can go fuck yourself. Whatever you need to say to Izzy you can say in front of me. He's not used to someone confronting him." Izuku gently squeezed her hand. Bakugo gave an angry grimace when Izuku said, "She is right, Kachan. Whatever you want to say to me, you can say it in front of her, so what do you want?" Then he frustratedly waved his hands in the air. "Fine. Listen you idiot, I have no idea how you got such an amazing quirk. But you are really starting to piss me off. Especially since for all the years I have tolerated having you around. You never showed any signs of that you had a quirk like that. Then all of a sudden you have an armor-type quirk that is more impressive than any I have ever seen before." Katsuki said with a voice full of rage. Momo and Izuku burst out laughing. He growled, "Do not laugh at me." Izuku told him, and Katsuki looked at him in disbelief. "Kachan, I thought you knew. I mean it is almost public knowledge that it is not a quirk. The Guyver is an alien device that sort of bonded to me and gave me that armor." He shook his head in shock. Katsuki blurted out, "You are lying. That is ridiculous and impossible." Izuku was full of shit, "I thought. It is true. The Guyver is not a quirk but some type of survival suit for aliens. If you want to know more ask Melissa Shields, she knows more than we do about it." Izuku was led away by Momo, leaving Katsuki trembling with anger and frustration. As he glared after the departing couple, Katsuki muttered, "No, it can't be true. How could worthless Deku basically stumble onto something that will make his desire to be a hero like All Might come true?" Observing them clasping hands, Izuku also had a girlfriend, and I wondered how that could have happened. Someone like Yaoyorozu, in particular. There was no way. He was being made fun of by someone. Katsuki roared and ranted all the way home as he stormed off. At this point, he felt the need to demonstrate that he was stronger than Deku, regardless of what Deku was. 0. Momo kicked off her shoes and collapsed on the apartment couch. "I'm beginning to rub them." She wanted to spend some time with Izuku, but she was exhausted from the long day. He sat down on the floor and gently brushed her hand away when he noticed that she was rubbing her feet with one hand. He massaged her tired and aching feet with both hands. Momo said in a gentle, endearing voice, "Oh wow, you are the best boyfriend ever." She closed her eyes and relished his actions. Reclined on the sofa, recognizing that Izuku could easily look up her skirt and be a pervert like Mineta if he had the necessary motivation. She grinned and opened one eye. He wasn't even trying to sneak a peek in. She was a little let down by that and started to question why he didn't seem to be tempted to look at least once. Izuku stopped rubbing after noticing her expression. Izuku questioned, "What's wrong? If this is not helping I can stop." Momo shook her head. Momo grinned down at him and said, "No, that feels good. I was just wondering." "Oh, never mind. It was stupid." He was aware that he wasn't physically attracted to her, which is why he didn't sneak a peek. He loved and respected her. After all, it was normal for a young man to be a little perverted, so she wouldn't mind if he did. That's why she would occasionally dress a little out of character to attract his attention. He stopped massaging his mother's feet and sat beside her when she came home from the store. Cuddled up against him, she took his right arm and draped it over her shoulders. I feel more at ease now. Momo leaned heavily against Izuku and said, "Oh, I better be careful or I might fall asleep right here again." Her mother wouldn't allow her to spend the night with Izuku again, so she couldn't do that for a while. 2 or more were deliberate, and 1 was an accident. She sat in the back of her family's chauffeur-driven vehicle on the way home an hour later. 0. Melissa stayed over after school and went over her boots and gauntlets again. Although they had all performed well during the training, they were now displaying stress fractures in both the boots and the gauntlets. She could feel and see tiny cracks, which meant she wouldn't be able to use them to prevent her arms and legs from suffering from the stresses of One for All. As he ran his own fingers along some of the more noticeable cracks, Powerloader said, "You might need to use something with more tensile strength than steel fibers." After determining that she would need to construct new ones before gaining access to anything more than 10% of All for One, Melissa said, "Well, they were just my first prototypes, maybe next time I will try titanium fibers with reinforcement in the stress points." With a small flat intersectional device of her own design in her hand, Mei Hatsuki turned away from her own work area and said, "I would suggest something a little different altogether, like carbonized titanium fibers with some sort of shock absorbent to reduce the stress completely." The 3 then started to theorize the additions to Melissa's new gauntlets and knee-high boots. "My babies, here are mini shock absorbers that should reduce the stresses of use and help with reinforcement." All that remained was for them to construct them so Melissa could use them to lessen the effects of One for All on her arms and legs. 0. Taronga grinned widely as he gazed appreciatively at the pictures on his desk. He had hired a private investigator to take pictures of Momo Yaoyorozu, using some of his meager resources. However, he was no longer gazing at her with gratitude. The man grinned when Taronga inquired, "Who are they?" with heightened curiosity about the other girls that the tiny weaselly investigator had taken. As he gave Taronga the list of names and ages, the investigator replied, "I have their names here. All of those are her classmates at the UA." Taronga set the list aside and resumed looking adoringly at the pictures of Momo. Taronga gave the investigator a smile and said, "I want more seductive images, ones of her possibly naked if you can." Taronga slid an envelope across the desk as the investigator said, "That is going to cost you double." The man flipped through the little pile of bills after opening it. Taronga nodded as he said, "I expect a bonus if I get any really good photos." Taronga responded, "I will pay triple for anything in that nature." The investigator got up and left. Shin shook his head, glaring at Taronga and then the investigator. Not happy that Taronga was not acting rationally, Shin remarked, "Martin, we do not have the money for things like that. The way you are spending what we have, we will be broke by the end of the month." Taronga smiled and said, "It will be all right, I will just ask Tamura for more." Shin was also disturbed by this. Recognizing that Tamura Shigaraki would eventually want outcomes rather than continuing to fund them. Tamura's backers had given Taronga nearly $100,000 USD since the fiasco, and he had done nothing to repay the investment. Tamura would eventually grow impatient and demand explanations or a sizable refund of the investment. What they had at the moment was complete disappointment. No one else could take the Guyver away and use it. In other words, Tamura was essentially paying Taronga to indulge his twisted fantasies. Shin questioned whether it was too late for him to simply depart, saying, "But Martin, I do not think that is a good idea. What if Tamura finds out about us not finding a way to take the Guyver from Midoriya and employing it upon him? He might kill us both for deceiving him." Taronga shook his head and laughed loudly. Taronga responded, admiring the photos of Momo Yaoyorozu, "He never will. For one, he is an idiot, he will believe whatever I tell him. So stop worrying, at some point soon we will leave." He was a little upset that their young benefactor did not pick up the phone when he called Tamura. He leaned back in the chair and looked at all the pictures once more. "Oh, that's right, that idiot told me that the League of Villains were going to attack. Well, I guess I will call him tomorrow and ask for more funding." I'm grinning broadly at them all. The League's attack. Izuku and the other students in the class followed Mr. Iwaza and number 13 to the training dome inside the Guyver. They were all anticipating the full day of training that was scheduled to take place inside the disaster response dome simulation. None of them anticipated the League of Villains' unexpected appearance. Izuku felt himself fall into the water, somewhat startled. As soon as he felt himself sink to the bottom of the fake lake, he became concerned. He felt his feet touch the bottom and held his breath. He exhaled and then inhaled because he could no longer hold his breath. When he breathed in air instead of water, he felt a wave of relief. In order for him to breathe, the Guyver armor was somehow converting the water into pure oxygen. As he began to cross the bottom of the lake, he thought, well, I learn something new every day. He headed for the fake yacht in the middle of the lake, easily knocking out 3 of the aquatic villains. He looked up, dug his clawed fingers into the ship's hull, and started to ascend. Pulling himself up over the side, he discovered Tsuyu Asui and Minoru Mineta. Izuku asked, "Are you two all right?" while largely ignoring the frightened Mineta. Because he was talking incoherently about hiding or giving up. Izuku made a plan and dove back into the water, sinking to the bottom again. The villains came at him right away, but he easily kicked and punched them away as he made his way to the coast. As a result, Asui had the opportunity to seize Mineta and leap for the shore. The aquatic villains quickly came to 2 realizations. Izuku was a formidable opponent and, 2, he was able to breathe underwater. He emerged from the water with a brisk gait and strolled onto the shore. He proposed, as Mineta blubbered about hiding once more, that, we should head for the entrance. Arriving just in time to see Mr. Iwasa being relentlessly beaten by some kind of creature. Izuku snapped out his blades with a snarl. With a hint of delight, Tomuro exclaimed, "Oh look Kurogiri, it is the Guyver." His hand flicked casually, and he said, "Nomu forget Eraserhead and bring me the Guyver." For a moment, the creature known as Nomu walked straight toward Izuku. Izuku was etched with fear. It appeared to be lethal. He just slashed, avoiding its arms as it lunged at him, chopping off one of its right hands. It didn't cry out or otherwise indicate that it was in pain. Rather, it used its left hand to backhand Izuku, sending him tumbling back against a wall nearby. Izuku experienced both blows and pain. He stood and watched as the Nomu's right hand grew back. Izuku remarked, now feeling uneasy about his situation, "That is not fair." He knew that he could cut off the creature's arms and legs and it wouldn't help based on what he had just seen. He drew back the blades and pressed the creature's right fist to his right hand, then his left. He was pushing as hard as he could in the hopes of overwhelming the thing. It resisted, and Izuku quickly saw that this would also not work. He fell to one knee, straining against the brutish thing. He hoped it was the ground and not him because he could hear the hard surface beneath him cracking. The creature abruptly stopped pushing, and Izuku saw a fist slam into the creature's head. Izuku used that diversion to shoot 2 accurate laser beams into the creature's eyes. Before flipping it over and slamming it to the ground, he grabbed its right wrist, leaping to my feet. To the person who had come in time to assist, Izuku said, "Thanks, Melissa." Melissa asked, her eyes wide, "What is that thing?" as the creature got up and began to move in their direction. "No idea, but I think it has all might, strength and power. We will have to work together to have even a hope of keeping it from hurting anyone, especially us." Izuku responded, "Okay, we attack it together. When it comes at me, you hit it. When it comes for you, I will hit it. We might be able to wear it down if we are lucky." He suggested and Melissa gave a nod. Melissa led off, lunging towards the creature, and it retaliated by striking back at her. "Sounds like a good plan. Let's do it." Izuku sprang forward and used his right leg to kick it across the head. Melissa then struck it after Nomu turned to attack him. Nomu whirled to seize Melissa, clasping her blonde hair with its right hand. With a lunge, Izuku severed its right hand. They were cooperating flawlessly up until this point. Iwasa stood off to one side, watching the fight feebly. Even though it hurt, he found it enlightening. As he winced from the many injuries, Iwasa thought, what they are doing and the way they are doing it. Someone would think they have been a team for years. Not many can work that well together so soon. Perhaps he would propose that the two become partners if he and everyone else survived. Melissa kicked the Nomu's right knee out, causing it to fall onto the dislocated leg as it attempted to strike Izuku with its regrown hand. It reared toward Melissa after Izuku slammed a haymaker into its jaw, and she struck it with her own fist. Tomuro watched in horror, unable to believe what he was witnessing. Even All Might couldn't defeat the Nomu, the master informed him. Heroes are surviving this one, but not this one and here too. Tamoru yelled angrily, "Get up you idiot and fight back." The Nomu started to lash out at the two antagonists, trying to strike one of them. However, Melissa and Izuku were too quick and efficient to deflect or block the blows. Giving their own back, as the armored Midoriya sliced off another of Nomu's arms at the shoulder, Tamoru watched in utter indignation. Yes, it would regrow, but it allowed the two assailants to repeatedly beat Nomu. Tamoru made the decision to get involved after deciding that enough was enough. He snuck over to the armored Guyver and extended his left hand. He was certain that the tables would turn against the would-be heroes with just one touch. Getting closer and closer. With a loud shout, Taisui Asui said, "Look out Midoriya. That weird guy with the hands all over him is right behind you." Tamoru glared at the girl who looked like a frog, and as he turned around, he noticed a blur in front of him. Then he watched a hand fly away over him with indifference. His left hand gave off an odd sensation. A tingle he had never experienced before. Izuku gazed at the leader of the villains and exclaimed, "Oh man. What did I do?" His voice was gasping as he said, "I did it out of reflex." Izuku jolted out of his reverie as Iwasa commanded in a voice laced with pain, "Midoriya. Forget about that right now, he will live. You and Melissa are the only ones capable of holding that thing at bay." He turned around and kicked the Nomu hard in the head before continuing to battle it. Behind him, Tamoru stood gazing at the stump of his left wrist. He watched in confusion as squirts of blood spurted from the stump. Subsequently, he experienced intense, radiating pain that traveled up his arm from his severed wrist. He screamed and grabbed his wrist while howling in agony. Kurogiri swiftly wrapped a shirt around the bleeding stump after ripping it off one of their fallen comrades. With a voice full of pain, Tamoru exclaimed, "He cut off my hand. He cut off my hand." I looked around before noticing his left hand a few feet away. Then he heard something he wished he had heard much earlier. All Might's voice reverberated throughout the dome, "Fear not. I am here." A few feet away, the number one hero and symbol of peace touched down. With a sigh of relief, the two immediately obeyed his command, "Midoriya, Melissa get back, leave that thing to me." Both of them were worn out and doubted that they could have repelled the Nomu for very long. The battle had begun. 0. There was another fight going on across the dome. She had made a metal bar and was pulling it from her chest. Kyoka Jiro was given another bar by Momo Yaoyorozu, while any criminal who got close enough was shocked by Denki Kaminari's taser. Denki startled another villain by stuttering, "Where the hell is your boyfriend when we need him?" Momo hoped she was aware. Kaminari shook his head when Momo said, "We do not need him." Kaminari go full out and nail all of them at once. Kaminari said, advancing toward the two girls, "If I do I will shock you too. I have not perfected my aim yet." The group of villains now practically surrounded them. Momo knelt down and focused on making something to keep Kyoka and herself safe. Her uniform top was torn as a big, multi-layered blanket poured out of her. Momo and Kyoka were kneeling beneath the blanket when she said, "Do it, this will protect us." Kaminari unleashed a powerful electric blast, which caused his brain to short out, glancing out from beneath the protective covering. Kyoka instantly pulled the blanket in front of Momo after she said, "I think he got them all." Kyoka told the now dim-minded Kaminari, "Do not look Kaminari." She said, looking down at Momo's well-proportioned, now bare chest, "You are topless Yaoyorozu." She took off a top and put it over her head, saying, "No problem, I will just make a replacement. Thank you for not letting Kaminari see me topless. Someday, the only one I want to see me this way will be Izuku Midoriya." They emerged from beneath the blanket and looked around. Regretfully, Kaminari had not received them all. A bullet pierced the man's shoulder, sending him to the ground before the villain could sufficiently threaten them. The teachers were here. The aftermath. Izuku slumped against a nearby wall, the leader and the shadowy Kurogiri gone from the battle. The battle with Nomu had taught him a few things. His abilities were not as boundless as he had thought. Like any other person, there was a limit in reality. Like everyone else, he was exhausted from constant activity. He sat down to take a short break as he felt the armor come back inside of him. He was sore and stiff all over. He looked better than Melissa. He could tell she had been fighting the Nomu with adrenaline near the end because she collapsed close to him. Melissa's voice wavered weakly as she said, "I feel like I am going to pass out right here." She closed her eyes and leaned heavily against the wall. He looked around, tried to get to his feet, and went to check on Momo. However, his knees trembled from exhaustion, and he fell back down, discovering that he was too exhausted to even go look. He closed his eyes and tried to summon the strength to try to stand up again. Then he heard a voice that instantly lifted his spirits. Izzy. Momo hurried to her boyfriend's side and knelt down in front of him. When she, Kyoka Jiro, and a still dumbwitted Denki Kaminari returned to the main entrance, Tsuyu Asui told her what had happened. She was so tempted to give him a hug that she worriedly asked, "Are you all right?" Then, without worrying about the consequences, she put her arms around him and gave him a firm hug. "I am fine, Em. Thanks to Melissa. Guess what, I found out that the Guyver does have limits after all." Izuku mumbled. He held Momo close to him while closing his eyes, saying, "I wish I found that out before taking on something that dangerous though." He felt somewhat rejuvenated by holding on to her, even though it might be absurd. Present Mike's loud voice seemed to reverberate throughout the dome as he said, "After everyone is accounted for and able, please report back to your classroom or the nurse's office if you require medical attention." Izuku knew better than to argue with Momo when she said sharply, "Well, you heard him. You two need to get to the nurse's office." After she helped him up, they both assisted Melissa, looking at a few of the other pupils. Momo said to her, "Hey Mina, come over and help Melissa." Mina hurried over to support Melissa, beaming broadly, allowing her to lean against the blonde girl. Momo assisted Izuku. Izuku leaned back on the hospital bed after the recovery girl had examined him and told him that he just needed some rest. Melissa was sleeping at the other one, and he was unable to calm down enough to fall asleep as well. He read a reporter's commentary about the necessity of making an example of him for going beyond the minimal force regulations on the television, which was on mute. Upon learning that the government liaison was contemplating legal action against him, he became discouraged. The liaison was at least making hints about being kicked out. He hardly acknowledged Momo when she walked in. Momo said sharply, "Recovery girl said you should be resting." Then she saw his face. She said, "What's wrong, Izzy?" And he shook his head and let out a breath. Izuku sat up on the bed and sulkily replied, "I am going to be expelled, Em." He looked at her with tears in his eyes and said, "I cut a man's hand off. I exceeded the minimal force laws and cut a man's hand off." Momo sat down beside him as he told her, "At the very least they will do is expel me from the UA, at the most I might be arrested and charged with excessive force." I took his hand. Knowing that he might be expelled or even arrested, Momo stated, "It was an accident and he was trying to kill you. The school and the government should take that into account." She had already seen the news and the statements made to the reporters by the government legal authority liaison. The bureaucrats would use the full force of the law to punish Izuku in order to curry favor with the populace, who believe that all heroes, including students, must abide by the mandated minimal force regulations. Izuku would thus be prosecuted and essentially sacrificed, even if everyone thought it was self-protection. Like that matters. All the government will focus on is that I cut a man's hand off. They won't care if that man was a villain, as long as they can tell the populace that they have punished someone for exceeding the law." Izuku said with a sigh. He eventually passed out from exhaustion and went to sleep. After sitting for a while, Momo got up and went to see if Izuku would be used as a scapegoat. The pro healer was busy trying to heal Iwaza, but she would ask recovery girl. So she went in search of Midnight. The teacher, who doubled as a superhero, informed all of the girls enrolled at the start of the school year. Come talk to her if they were having any issues. Momo had an issue and needed solutions right away. In her office, she discovered Midnight. Momo stood in front of the open door and said, "Miss Midnight, may I speak to you for a moment?" With a smile, the dark-haired teacher motioned for Momo to come in. Midnight inquired, "Of course, how can I help you? Are you and Midoriya having any problems?" The majority of the school and all of the teachers were aware that Momo Yaoyorozu and Izuku Midoriya were in a romantic relationship. Momo took a seat across from the elderly lady. Midnight stopped grinning when Momo questioned, "Is it true that the government is going to punish Midoriya for exceeding the minimal force regulations?" At first, Midnight wanted to lie to the younger girl, but she said, "At this moment, Principal Nezu and the school's lawyers are attempting to persuade the government liaisons not to move forward with any charges or accusations against Midoriya. However, that reporter has stoked the government's paranoia, but concluded that speaking the truth was preferable. Do not worry too much. If anyone can convince those idiots that Midoriya did not exceed the minimal force laws, it is Principal Nezu." She was beaming with encouragement. She bent over. She whispered to Momo, but if your family knows anyone in the government you might want to ask for their help. Momo nodded sympathetically, saying, Midoriya needs as much help as he can get right now. She called her chauffeur and left Midnight's office to go home. Her father would be home by now, and she would be in dire need of his assistance if he would provide it. 0. Momo's departure caused Izuku to open his eyes again. In order to get Momo to leave, he had pretended to fall asleep. He was so distraught that he did not want her to see it. The fact that there was only one reporter pressuring the liaisons to punish him was the only bright spot in the scenario. Every other channel appeared to be more concerned with the League of Villains, attacking the number of criminals currently in custody. He found it incomprehensible that this particular reporter was so determined to punish him. 0. Hoshi Mosadio made another report and attempted to persuade the other networks and reporters to do something that would help him advance in his career. He had taken the initiative, and so far, none of the others had. To keep calling for the first-year students' arrest and prosecution. However, the majority of his coworkers disagreed with him. He was concerned about that. He might be perceived as having a personal agenda against the student in the UA if none of the others did so quickly. He demanded that the student be formally punished for exceeding the minimal force laws, ignoring both his producer and the cameraman. Then something he hadn't anticipated. To his dismay, Linda Yakanoshi, one of his rivals from a different network, started expressing her opinion that Izuku Midoriya was a hero who had saved the lives of his classmates. Hoshi was aware that his career would end and all of his hard work would be in vain if the public supported Linda. The other man tapped the cameraman's shoulder and said, I warned you this might happen. He saw his producer shake his head behind the cameraman. Hoshi moaned in desperation as he whispered, stop taping. Hoshi's reign is about over. 0. Momo headed straight for the large living room without bothering to change out of her uniform. Being aware that her mother and father were most likely indoors watching the news, she informed them that she was all right over the phone. However, she now required her father's assistance. The family hugged her first, and then she reassured them that she was okay once more. Momo sadly said to her father, Daddy, I need you to call some of your friends in the government and have them help Izuku. She then picked up the television remote control. The reporter turned it over to the channel and demanded that Izuku Midoriya be taken into custody and charged. The father shook his head and let out a breath. Momo looked at Miyagi Yaoyorozu with tears in her eyes as he firmly said, I can't do it, Momo. I won't help him. Her mother Keiko stepped in front of her husband and placed her hands on her hips, demanding, why not Mia? Giving him a fierce look. I do not like that our daughter is so involved with him. Especially now, he did exceed the minimal force laws, so he must face this alone. If he is prosecuted, you have to consider how the public will perceive Momo's involvement with him. Everyone knows that the Guyver was discovered by our company. What if the public's opinion decides that he is a danger to society? It could have a negative effect on our stock. Miyagi told them and they both stared at him furiously. Using a tiny little voice, Keiko Yaoyorozu said to her daughter, Momo, please leave for a moment. I want to have a few words with your father. As Momo left the living room and closed the door, she added, it will be all right, dear. Keiko then turned to face her husband. Miyagi Gino Yaoyorozu. That is the most heartless, insensitive and fucking ruthless thing I ever heard you say. She said in complete disbelief. She didn't think her own husband would treat Momo in particular with such cruelty. She was so sincere in her statement that her husband failed to notice the sarcasm in her voice. So what do you want? Our daughter to break off her relationship with him? State that there is no relationship, that they are not involved with each other. Basically break her heart and his. Miyagi grinned. Yes, we can hold a press conference and she can publicly state that she and Midoriya are no longer socially involved. That she denounces him completely. At that point I can provide scientific proof that the young man has no ties with our company. In essence he only has the Guyver because it is bonded to him. So the public will understand that our company is not legally responsible for anything he might do. As Miyagi suggested, Keiko snatched a vase from a nearby stand and hurled it in his direction. It crashed against the fireplace, just missing him. He said in horror, hey, that was a 17th century Ming vase. Then he saw his wife's face as she snarled into his face and grabbed his suit jacket's lapels. Keiko screamed, I was not fucking serious. And Miyagi winced. Now listen, Miyagi. First you are going to call all your friends in the government and demand their help. Second you are going to apologize to your daughter and third you will never, I mean never make Momo ever feel like that again. You almost broke her heart, she deeply cares about that young man. So if you do not do exactly as I have said you might want to call your lawyer, because I will divorce your fucking ass and take you to the fucking cleaners. Remember dear husband, I legally own 56% of Yau Industries and I have the majority voting rights within the board of directors. By the time I am done, you will be lucky to be working there as a janitor. He grinned, being aware of his wife's seriousness, particularly given her profanity. Unless she was really angry, she never did that. He grabbed his cell phone and started making calls. Keiko opened the door in the meantime. She smiled broadly as she told her daughter, "You can rest easy Momo, I convinced your father to help your Izuku," then comforted Momo while her daughter sobbed. 0. Inside the office of Principal Nezu, a government liaison, All Might, and a sanctioned school lawyer named Nezu paid close attention to the television. Izuku Midoriya was still being reprimanded by the Channel 232 reporter for going beyond the laws governing the minimal use of force. Nezu said, "I think at some point we will have to make an official statement to the press." The middle-aged man winced as Nezu suggested that he wanted to defuse the reporter's implication. Not wanting to make his own decisions, the liaison responded, "Now Principal Nezu, until I hear from my superiors then I am not about to make a decision on whether or not to make a statement. If he made a mistake, his career could be in danger." He picked up his cell phone and held it out for everyone to see that he had not received any calls yet. He refused to acknowledge to anyone in Nezu's office that he didn't think Midoriya had done anything wrong. Self-defense was the reason. All Might, a little irritated that the government was taking its time deciding whether or not to formally punish Midoriya, asked, "So what will happen to young Midoriya if your superiors decide to relent to that jackass on Channel 232? The liaison scowled and took a breath. The liaison responded, without informing Nezu or All Might that 4 police officers were currently waiting outside to arrest Midoriya if necessary. Then unfortunately there has to be some sort of official punishment. At the most I suspect he will be arrested, charged, and prosecuted. At the minimum he will not be allowed to continue attending O. That is all up to my superiors. I apologize, but the government is currently concerned that the reporter might be influencing the populace in believing that Midoriya did exceed the law." Nezu prevented the number 1 hero from standing and expressing his thoughts about that in a more tangible manner by placing a retraining paw on All Might's forearm. The school, the teachers and even the administration are ready to publicly support Midoriya for his actions within the dome. We will not let that reporter or the government use one of our students as a sacrificial lamb. What he did was an accident at most, or from what we have learned it was self-defense. The man that lost his hand is vastly dangerous and at that moment Midoriya was fighting against a creature that could have injured or killed every student there. Nezu stated and the liaison nodded. Nezu switched the channel to 111 as the liaison pointed to the TV and said, "I apologize, but that is not how that reporter sees it." A very attractive reporter was praising Midoriya as a hero on that news channel. Nezu kept flipping through the channels, and other people followed suit. 3 hours later, he got the call that everyone had been waiting for. "Okay, maybe that is why my superiors had not contacted me yet. They are waiting for the opinion polls decide how to proceed." 0. Tomoru sat in his chair and gazed at the TV, then took a quick look at his severed wrist, which had what the doctor referred to as ghost sensations, and was where his left hand had been. He insisted that he could feel itching in his left hand's fingers. Fortunately, there was excellent medical care in the League of Villains. Criminal physicians whose licenses were revoked for malpractice. He gazed at the spot where his left hand had been. He no longer desired to own the armor or even to recruit the young man in the Guyver. He desired to murder the young man. Kill him in the most horrible and agonizing manner you can. He learned that the haughty man wanted more money when he called Professor Taronga. He sent Kurogiri right away with $500,000 and told Taronga to figure out how to get rid of the Guyver. 0. 5 hours later, Izuku opened his red-rimmed eyes and woke up. With a smile on her face, Melissa said, "Oh good you are awake too." Izuku scowled back at her as she said, "I felt like I got run over by a steamroller." "So how are you doing, Midoriya?" Restarting the television, the reporter who demanded that he be held accountable for his actions was gone, much to his surprise. "Wait, earlier there was a reporter on this channel who kept saying that I should be punished for cutting that guy's hand off. Where is he?" Izuku asked without comprehending. He assumed that the arrogant man would ramble on about the incident for hours, but now that the weather was being discussed on that channel, there was nothing about him. Izuku switched it to another channel after Melissa said, so maybe on another channel there might be something. Nothing again. Izuku was perplexed by this because, among other things, he thought the police would have arrived by now and taken him into custody. So what are you worried about? She inquired, sounding a little worried. Izuku gave a headshake. Izuku heard her laugh as he said, I cut that man's hand off. I exceeded the minimal force laws. That means I probably will be expelled or at most arrested. Not going to happen, Midoriya. If they even think of expelling you, then they need to expel me too, especially since when we were fighting that creature, I went full out to harm it as much as possible, Melissa said with determination. Izuku felt better after saying, so if they won't expel me too, then I walk and tell them they can stick this school up their collected asses. Not much, though, it seemed a little extreme to cut off someone's hand. He could have unintentionally severed the man's head instead, just an inch to the right. When the man attempted to attack him from behind, he quickly allowed his armor reflexes to take control. He didn't consciously think before he slashed. She began to sit up and noticed something right away that she had not noticed before. So when do you think they will let us out of here? I for one need a shower really badly. She gave a little squeak and pulled the sheet covering her closer to her chin. She gasped and said, they took my uniform off. Izuku told her, observing her flushed face, yes, and put a hospital gown on you. Your uniform was pretty shredded from the fight. So recovery girl removed it. Melissa's face turned even more red as she told him, I am not wearing any underwear. So all that is covering me is this flimsy hospital gown which is opened in the back. Melissa frowned at Izuku as he began to laugh. He gave her a big smile in response to her complaint, this is not funny, Midoriya. I got to go to the bathroom and I am basically naked. He placed the sheet on his own bed and used the material to cover his head. Melissa carefully got out of bed, held the back ends of her gown together, and hurried into the adjacent bathroom after Izuku said, okay, I am covered and cannot see you. Go ahead, I promise not to look, and if I do, you have my permission to tell my girlfriend Momo that I did. After a couple of minutes, as Izuku took the sheet off over his head, Melissa said, okay, I'm back in bed and covered. Melissa switched the TV to an American transmitted channel while they waited. On I-Island, she watched one. She sat up and pointed to the screen. Izuku looked at the screen with only a passing interest and said, this is my favorite TV show, even though it is only repeats now since they ended it. Melissa grinned at Izuku as he asked, what is it called? Melissa responded, it is called The Big Bang Theory. She went on to describe the program and its cast in a commercial, pointing out that Sheldon is not your average physicist. Unless they are in a mental institution, no one behaves in that manner. Izuku found that he enjoyed the show. He promised himself that the next time he and Momo were searching for something to watch on TV, they might watch it together. Recovery Girl entered when a new episode began. Recovery Girl looked up at the smiling present Mike and said, well, you two seem fit enough now. Present Mike had volunteered to drive you both home, so now I suggest that you both get some more rest. Oh, by the way, the principal expects you both in class on Monday, so please be on time. After telling his mother that he was okay, Izuku called Momo as soon as he got home. He lay down and spoke to Momo for an hour without mentioning his expulsion or the possibility of his arrest. At last, the other shoe fell. He wasn't shocked when Momo practically jumped into his waiting arms at the UA. Trying desperately not to cry, she clung to Izuku and gave him a tight hug. They went to class after she was able to control herself. Awaiting 1A outside the homeroom door was All Might. With a shake of his head, All Might said, Principal Nezu wants to see you, Midoriya. Momo scowled up at the number 1 hero as he said, sorry Yaoyorozu, he only wants to see Izuku, Midoriya. You need to go inside and wait for him to return to tell you what it is about. Observing Izuku leave with All Might at his heels. As they discussed yesterday's events, Momo sat at her desk in the classroom, barely listening to anyone. Rather, she gazed at the door with anxiety. She would be most concerned that Izuku would not be coming back. That he was going to be expelled from the school or, worse, arrested. Her father had bravely spent hours debating with his government friends, requesting that they act as an advocate for Izuku Midoriya. They wouldn't make any commitments. The worst-case scenario was now Momo's only thought. She hardly noticed when Mr. Iwaza came in. Only Momo knew the answer to Awaza's question, does anyone know where Midoriya is? She burst into tears at once, putting her head on the desk and sobbing. Izuku started to question why the police weren't present as he followed All Might into the principal's office. Then he understood the purpose of his summons. He was going to be kicked out. Izuku shook his head when Nezu said, "Please sit down, Mr. Midoriya. Would you like some tea?" Not wanting to wait for the principal or All Might to make concessions, Izuku blurted out, "No thank you. Okay, let us get this over with. I am being expelled, right?" Simply inform him that he will no longer be permitted to attend UA, that his aspirations to become a hero had vanished. We do not understand why the reporter was so adamant about having you expelled or arrested. But thankfully the people did not agree, so the government of course finally did not agree. So no, you are not being expelled or arrested. Nezu responded, and Izuku breathed a sigh of relief. He felt as though a burden had been lifted. With a broad smile, All Might remarked, "You are truly being praised as a hero, young Midoriya," not informing the young man that his network had fired the reporter who persisted in demanding punishment. These reporters were occasionally their own worst enemies. Do not let inflate your ego any. It could have easily gone the other way and there would be nothing I or the school could do. You could have been expelled, arrested, or probably both. Now I believe you should return to class. We just wanted to inform you about this." Nezu concluded, and Izuku stood and returned to school. The door closed and Nezu turned to face All Might. "We need to discuss about this whole situation. This cannot happen again where an overbearing reporter tries to convince the public and government to prosecute someone unjustly," sternly stated All Might. "This type of witch hunt goes against everything I have fought to accomplish." "I agree, All Might. Perhaps if the #1 hero publicly denounces this incident, then the government will have to make changes on how they allow someone to influence them to take unneeded action." Nezu made the suggestion and All Might fully comprehended. Izuku went back to class, opened the door, and entered. He grinned as everyone turned to stare at him. Momo stood and gazed at him with relief and joy as his eyes swung out. He gave her a nod, and she sat there, trying not to cry. Trying not to smile, Iwaza said, "Welcome back, Midoriya. Please take your seat." During his brief hospital stay, he had learned that the reporter was attempting to persuade the public to bring charges against Midoriya for chopping off the psychopath's hand. He would accept the punishment and the blame, at the very least. Claiming to have given Midoriya permission to defend himself, he dismissed the class and sagged to the ground, saying, "Now that you all are here, I need to inform you all that next week is the sports festival. Therefore, for the rest of the week, there will be no classes so that you can train for the events." Desiring to sleep, deciding to speak with Izuku, Midoriya and Melissa Shields about joining a team after the sports festival, Momo walked to the desk of Izuku, ignoring the other people who had gathered around him to inquire about what they had seen on the news. She approached him and leaned in. Momo took his arm and led him to the front gate, saying, "Come on, I really need to hug and kiss you." When she arrived, she seized him and gave him a tight hug before the others could intervene or stop her. She pressed her lips to his, separating a little. Her eyes were watery as she said, "Please tell me that you are not being expelled." "Nope, not this time." Thankfully the government in its infinite wisdom decided not to agree with that reporter that seemed to want me either expelled or prosecuted. Izuku responded and Momo kissed him once more. Momo smiled slightly and said, "Can we go back to your apartment? I want to be alone with you for a while." With so many other students around, it was challenging to accomplish anything. If any of them caught her kissing Izuku, it didn't matter to her. However, some people, like Mineta, stared at her and him excessively. Izuku took her hand and they walked to the train station. "Yes, there is actually an American TV show I wanted you to see. Melissa introduced me to it the other day and I think you would really like it." Training with Momo, Melissa, and Mina in the afternoons. In the Guyver, Melissa and Izuku would spar and work out together. After he trained with Momo and Mina, they spent the hours doing physical training, which helped them get ready for the festival. They were all able to finish some quality training, and it became a habit. Melissa and Mina would go home after the training, in order for Momo and Izuku to spend some time together. All four agreed by Friday that they were prepared for anything that the sports festival had in store. Fairness at the sports festival. Izuku waited for the other competitors to cross the finish line as he competed in the first event of the sports festival, which was a race around the arena. With little effort, he had easily outrun the others in his Guyver form, but now he felt some remorse. Outpacing the others had been too simple, and Izuku felt as though he had cheated in some ways. Indeed, The main purpose of the sports festival was for UA attendees to showcase their abilities in hopes of being approached by hero agencies to intern or join their agencies. For him, however, he had no quirk to exhibit. The abilities he had just used to compete in the race were provided by his alien bioelectronic armor. He deactivated the Guyver and stepped up to where Midnight stood on the podium. She knelt to listen after noticing his expression. Midnight looked at Izuku in disbelief as he declared, "I wish to be disqualified." "Why?" Midnight inquired, unable to comprehend. According to her assessment as the sports festival's official referee, Izuku Midoriya had not engaged in any unethical behavior that would have resulted in his disqualification. "This festival is a contest for us students to demonstrate our quirks. I do not possess a quirk, the Guyver is not something that even qualifies as a quirk. So in essence I cheated when I competed in the last event. If you do not disqualify me, then I will just not continue." Izuku responded and Midnight was forced to concur. Midnight switched on the announcer speaker and said, "I think you are going to regret this, Midoriya. But it is your choice." She turned off the device and scowled down at Izuku Midoriya. "Attention. Izuku Midoriya has requested that he be disqualified and I have agreed. So now Katsuki Bakugo has been moved to first place rather than second place. All other rankings have also been increased by 1. She wasn't alone in being angry about Izuku's choice to disqualify himself. Momo scowled at him and dragged him to a private space. Angry, Momo said, "What the fuck are you doing?" She started pacing before him. After giving it some thought, she demanded, "You spent the last week sparring with Melissa and all that training with me and Mina you did to prepare for the sports festival. Why would you just quit after all that?" She held her right palm up to him. "Sometimes it was great to be with someone so intelligent. That training was not for you. It was for her, me, and Mina. You had no intention of competing past the first round." He grinned proudly at her. "At other times, it was difficult. Okay, you got me. From the beginning I wondered if it would be fair if I competed. This thing that is inside me, a part of me, is not a quirk. It is an alien-created device that has allowed me to attend the UA. It gave me the combat skills and abilities, where you and the others had to work hard to utilize your quirk to become heroes. For me to compete would be unfair to all of you that worked so hard to be here. I won't do that to you or anyone else. Not even Kachan." Izuku told her with a grin on his face, explanation with a slight chuckle. She pulled him in by wrapping her arms around his waist. Momo grinned and leaned in to kiss him, not caring if they were in trouble for making public displays of affection on school campus property. "You know, times when you are this noble really makes me happy that I am your girlfriend." She gave him one last quick kiss and said, "I would love to stay and continue this, but they are about to announce the next round and I still plan on winning this thing." Izuku grinned at him and said, "I hope you do. I will stay and root for you." Then returned to the group to find out what the next round would be. Izuku watched the remainder of the sports festival from the student box seats, barely noticing Tenya Ida's sudden departure later. Izuku wrapped his arms around Momo and held her firmly from behind in one of the private rooms. In addition to being deceived and humiliated by that pervert Minoru Mineta, she was upset. However, she was defeated by Fumikare Tokiyami. Izuku was more irritated because she wasn't sure. She laughed and shook her head when he said, "If you want me to, I will go and beat the living shit out of Mineta. But I thought you looked really great in that cheerleader uniform." Even though Momo was embarrassed by what had happened, she smiled and said, "No, I do not think that would help." She liked that Izuku liked seeing her in that uniform. She was a little taken aback to learn that Melissa and Toru had not felt embarrassed by their parade in cheerleader uniforms. Both had enthusiastically embraced it, showing off their possessions and pumping the pom-poms for the crowds, putting on a show for everyone. Momo decided that would be okay and shrugged when Izuku said, "Personally though, I think I might have a word with Mineta and Kaminari not to ever do something like that again to you." Katsuki Bakugo emerged victorious at the festival's conclusion. However, he wasn't happy with his victory, particularly because he was not given the chance to face Izuku Midoriya. Fighting a psychopath during an internship. Being tasked with going with Melissa to Gran Torino for her internship. Izuku Midoriya considered Iwasa's proposal that he and Melissa form a team as partners. The idea did not exactly sit well with Momo, but Iwasa persuaded her that not every member of the team is romantically involved. The majority aren't, since it wasn't a smart idea to have an emotional bond with a coworker. They all understood that. Izuku was primarily there to assist Melissa in better managing her quirk. For his part, He thought Gran Torino was senile and only occasionally sane. However, he eventually came to the realization that it was all a ruse to divert Melissa's attention and force her to learn how to manage her quirk on her own. Izuku made the decision to go see how Tenya was doing. It was almost effortless to run across the rooftops, especially if you can jump 50 feet at a time. Observing Tenya more closely from above, it was almost obvious to Izuku that his classmate was acting strangely. Tenya appeared to be searching for someone and was excessively tense. All hell broke loose at that point, and he lost sight of Tenya during that brief diversion. Because his pro-hero was no longer with him, he wondered why Tenya was moving so quickly as he jumped to the next roof and saw the blur of Tenya in his hero uniform turning a corner into an alley. Then he saw the hero killer, the cause. He swiftly texted every student in his class after pulling out his cell phone. Everyone but Momo. I didn't want her to come and put herself in any more danger than she had to. Izuku muttered, "This is going to get me expelled for sure," and jumped out of the building. As he went down, he snapped his blades out, crouching between the hero killer and Iida, stopping the downward cut before Iida was impaled. "Back off," Izuku snarled, slashing with his own left blade after deflecting the blow to one side. The hero killer leapt a few feet backwards and easily evaded the slash. He held his sword before him. The hero killer glared at the armored man in front of him and gritted his teeth, saying, "So another would-be hero has come to interfere with my mission. This I cannot allow." Stain swung his sword at the armored young man in front of him as he lunged towards his new foe, grinning menacingly. Izuku cut the sword both ways with both blades. When the tip of his sword clanged to the ground, Stain gaped in wonder. The carbonized laser-sharpened steel sword, which had been severed for several inches, now came to a sudden stop. He grinned widely. Finding a deserving opponent to take on him was what he had hoped would occur. He smirked and pulled out his other shorter sword. The boy was struck again. "Come boy, let us discover if you are a hero that can claim that title." Izuku learned that unless he could strike the swords with both blades at an exact angle, he would have to deflect the shortened long sword first, followed by the shorter sword. He was unable to dismantle Stain's swords once more. He started to question whether he could really be cut by the swords. Izuku aimed a laser at the psychopath as Stain leapt back. Stain just used his shorter sword to block it, leaving the blade with a carbon mark. He attempted to knock Stain off his feet with a sweeping kick. He deflected two more of his blows at the same moment. Izuku stood a moment later, his blades aimed directly downward. The time had come to bluff and hope Stain was foolish enough to fall for it. Izuku said firmly, hoping that Stain would at least back down, "You are no match for me, hero killer. As you have noticed, I can cut your swords apart with little ease." In an attempt to scare Stain into accepting his bluff, he added, "If we continue, I do not think I can ensure you do not lose body parts in the process." Stain, however, just laughed even harder. With his swords in a combative stance, Stain declared, "You are proving to be a true hero, unlike those charlatans that believe that they are heroes. So until I am sure, I must discover if you are a true hero or not." Since he had not yet found someone who could match him or even push him to the limit, he really wanted to keep going. So far, lunging again in the direction of the boy, and grinning contentedly, felt and heard steel clanging loudly against his metal blades. Izuku learned with every blow and counter-movement that Stain was not just a psychopath. Additionally, he had a great deal of hand-to-hand fighting training. Izuku contemplated using his chest blaster to its maximum potential against the hero killer, but was aware it wouldn't work, similar to the time he confronted that Nomu in the dome. Several blocks worth of buildings and people would sustain serious damage if that ultimate weapon were used. He didn't use it in the dome since he wasn't sure if the structure could survive having a significant amount of it collapse. It was essentially the same thing here. Therefore, he would have to use traditional fighting techniques to defeat him. He was fighting with his hands and feet while wielding a sword. Stain quickly realized that he might be outmatched when he heard the clang of steel against unknown metal reverberating down the alley. The stress of constant fighting was starting to get to him. He was unable to determine whether the boy was growing weary at all. He had to put an end to this battle quickly if he was to complete his mission. He jumped back, pulled, and threw 3 throwing knives. The armored boy deflected them all with ease, and he had to smile. He had been looking for something like this, to confront a real warrior who was superior to everyone else, including All Might. The hero killer was essentially rendered unconscious and bound when another arrived, and the battle quickly came to an end. Repercussions and responsibility. Izuku, who had emerged from the altercation with Stain unscathed, was waiting in the hospital room. However, Todoroki and Iida suffered injuries. It was determined that Izuku needed to go with Iida and Todoroki to the hospital to be checked out just in case, after Stain was turned over to the police and the responding pro-heroes. He grimaced at his phone as he waited to be released. Momo had texted him twice that amount and made at least 24 calls to him. Todoroki saw the look on his face. Izuku held up his phone as the multi-quirker asked, "Something wrong, Midoriya?" Izuku responded, "I think I may be in serious trouble." Iida grinned as she saw how many calls and texts Yaoyorozu had sent. Iida and Todoroki both began to laugh when he said, "You might want to call her. I do not know anything about women. But the longer you do not call her the madder she is going to get." Izuku's two friends kept laughing at his situation as he said, "No, I will wait until I see her face to face. I do not have any intention of being yelled at over the phone." Fortunately, All Might and the chief of police arrived at that moment, letting them know that the three were essentially not present, that Stain the hero killer was not fought by them. After 2 hours, they were discharged from the hospital. Momo was impatiently waiting for Izuku as he left the building. She gave him a noticeable scowl. Momo nodded, folded her arms across her chest, and waited for him to explain why he had once again been such a fool. "Before you chew me out, please hear me out. Okay, so I was keeping an eye on Iida in case he did something foolish, and when I saw the hero killer about to stab him, I just reacted." Momo nodded her head. Momo scowled at him visibly and crossed her arms in front of her chest, protesting, "So instead of calling for help, you decide to do something just as foolish." She reprimanded him all the way back to his apartment, saying, "Sometimes I think that when you activate the Guyver you turn off the connections to your brain." She was upset that she might have lost him to that psychopath, but as soon as she was alone, she immediately collapsed back into his arms. The dissolution. Momo sat on the veranda with her mother, Keiko, 2 days prior to being released for a 4-day weekend. She chose to invite Izuku, Mina Ishido, Toru Hagakure, Kyoka Jiro, and Ochako Uraraka in addition to Izuku because she was so excited about the 3 days on I-Island. She also wanted Tsuyu Asui to join her, but the frog quirker was unable to do so because she was spending the break visiting her grandmother. "I want the weekend to be mostly spent with girls." As she sipped her iced tea, Keiko Yaoyorozu said, "I want to discuss something important with you." She paused and said, "Now you know I adore Izuku, and for your first boyfriend he is perfect." Momo winced, sensing that something significant was about to happen. "I think you two need to take a small break from each other. Make sure your feelings towards him and his feelings for you are real. You two sort of rushed into a serious relationship and you both are a little too young to be in that type of relationship so soon." She proceeded to exhale. Momo said, "Mom, I really do love him." Keiko shook her head. Momo had to agree with most of her mother's advice, which included Kiko's advice. "All I am asking is for you two to take a short time apart. Then after, if both feel the same way about each other, then there is nothing to worry about." They had essentially jumped into a committed relationship too quickly, so maybe it would be okay to take their time. Because she was thinking about moving the relationship forward, a more tangible level in which they were both in bed and naked. She also considered getting married to him and starting a family of at least 3 kids. Youngsters with a mix of dark and green eyes and dark green hair. At last, Momo said, "Okay Mom. I guess that makes sense. I hoped she wasn't doing something wrong. I would suggest you tell him it is so you can have time to consider if you two belong together or not. Blame me if you want, that will probably make it easier on both of you." Keiko said with a nod. Still unsure of her actions, Momo said, "Tomorrow is the last day of class before the 4-day break, I will tell him then." Although her mother was correct, she knew deep down that she loved Izuku. Since they first met, it appeared as though they had simply fallen in love without really knowing how. Therefore, maybe some time apart could help them determine whether they truly love each other or if they just think they do. Bringing the bomb down, Izuku essentially collapsed in front of Momo as she watched. His eyes stung with tears as she explained the rationale and that she would only be able to determine whether their feelings for one another were genuine or merely something they both believed to be so until she had more time. Izuku heard nothing but the startled, desperate words, "You are breaking up with me." Seeing the utter despair in his eyes, Momo told him sadly, "It is only for a couple of weeks." She was tempted to change her mind. She thought he might understand if she gave him an explanation, so she didn't mean to hurt him this much. that spending this time apart would only strengthen their bond because they would realize they belonged together and had a future. Without understanding that it would only be temporary or the other justification for Momo's announcement, Izuku muttered, "You are breaking up with me." He felt as though Momo had reached into his chest and removed his heart, and that was all he could think about. He turned and left, not wanting her to witness his total collapse. Before she could stop him, he activated the Guyver and ran faster than she could possibly keep up with. Once he arrived at the men's locker room, he turned around and went inside to find some privacy in one of the restroom stalls. Mourning his loss for an entire hour, recalling that he needed to attend Melissa's partnership training, Melissa was waiting in the middle, stumbling into the training area. They would compete against several tripod 3-meter-tall robots that would rise out of the ground during a typical partnership training session today. As they made their way to the exit, the two were supposed to shield one another from harm. In general, the exercise was simple, but Izuku wasn't feeling very well today. Melissa commanded, "Pause." The robots ceased emerging from the earth. She frowned as she turned to face Izuku. With some irritation and worry, she said, "Okay, what's wrong? We kicked this obstacle's ass by this time yesterday, and today you let the last 5 get to me." With a sharp exhale, Izuku turned off the Guyver. Izuku sat on one of the fake rocks and said, "Sorry about that. I guess my head is not into this today." Melissa knelt before him as he muttered in agony, "Yaoyorozu just broke up with me." Melissa suggested, trying desperately to conceal her joy, "Oh. I see that would throw you off a bit. Hey, let's not do this today. Let's go to the dinner and talk a bit." She liked Izuku Midoriya and wouldn't mind being more than just friends and partners, just like the majority of the girls at UA. Regretfully, Mr. Iwasa recommended that partners avoid romantic involvement. Melissa would not mind, however, if that suggestion were broken. She was aware that people would eventually swarm to Izuku and desire him. In particular, Toru Hagakure and Mina Ishido, moving in the direction of the exit. She asked, "Did she give a reason why she broke up with you?" And Izuku walked with his eyes lowered to the floor, letting her know what she said. He unloaded everything on her as they sat down to a dinner that they all frequently attended. She listened and occasionally offered consoling remarks in response. He appeared to sag in the seat after finishing. Izuku sipped from his soda and remarked, "I do not understand why she broke up with me. I thought we loved each other." Melissa gave a headshake. Melissa said, not really believing that any of her friends who broke up with their boyfriends usually never got back together, perhaps that is the reason she did that. Like she said, she needed time to make sure that you two are in love. You know, she might be right in that. Some time apart might clarify your feelings for each other. Usually as a result of one or both of them having moved on. She was aware that Izuku would soon start dating someone else in order to cope with the loss of Momo. It couldn't be Eden, but she had a sneaking suspicion that if she didn't invite him, he would spend the entire 4 days moping in his room. Speaking of time, this weekend is the I-Expo. Uncle All Might wants me to go home to see my dad. Maybe you should come so you can have time to think. Melissa grinned as Izuku said, "It is by invitation only and I was not invited." "That is right, I am inviting you. I already have an open invitation and I can bring a guest. You can stay in my and my dad's guest room at our apartment." Melissa made the suggestion. Izuku grinned for a moment, then scowled again. Melissa gave a disapproving shake of her head when Izuku said, "I do not know. I think I'd rather be alone this weekend." "Nope, not going to happen. All you will do is sit in your room and I suspect mourn over Momo Yaoyorozu." "Not going to happen," Melissa said emphatically. Izuku shrugged as she grinned at him and said, "You are going if I have to kidnap you." Melissa's smile grew as Izuku said, "I guess I am going then," deciding that she would reconsider her decision to disregard Mr. Iwasa's suggestion. It would be best if she and Izuku were not romantically involved if they were to be hero team partners. The only outcome would be that they couldn't be partners, which would be terrible because they get along so well. Melissa got up and walked him back to his apartment so he could pack for the trip, saying, "Good. Now let's go get you packed. I hope you have a suit and tie, there is a formal dinner during the expo." The fiasco on I-Island. Izuku wasn't particularly excited about traveling on the private plane. He would have rather stayed home and sulked and brooded in his room. Melissa took a seat across from him. Melissa said, although she didn't really believe it, "I think once there you will be so impressed that you will have no time to think about Yaoyorozu." She pushed her leg against his while grinning at him. He laughed a little at her strange joke when she said, "At least try not to look like I kidnapped you when we get to customs." Izuku looked out the window at the cloud formation that he swore looked like Momo and said, "I am sorry, it is just everything reminds me of Momo and how much I miss her." Reaching over, Melissa closed the blind. Izuku gaped at Melissa as she told him, "Just try to forget about her on this trip. Oh, and I should warn you, my father might think that we are a couple and he might be a little overprotective." She raised her eyebrows and said, "I told him that we are not a couple, we are a paired hero team. But he thinks every boy is after, ahem." Izuku was perplexed. Izuku questioned, "After what?" Melissa began to laugh and shook her head. In order to avoid Uncle All Might overhearing, she leaned closer. As Melissa's cheeks turned red, she whispered, "Let's just say that it involves us both being naked and doing something, well, I rather not say." Izuku understood. His own cheeks turned red. Izuku blushed further and whispered, "Oh, that." Melissa grinned and said, "Yes, that. My father still thinks I am a little girl, not a woman." She was tempted to tell her father that she and her partner were in love with Izuku Midoriya, merely to observe her father's response. It would be humorous even though it would be a lie. No matter how amusing it might be, she could not harm Izuku or her father in that way. She shifted the topic of conversation, and she was relieved that he was no longer obsessing over Momo. Melissa opened the blind so he could see I-Island as the plane started to descend. She escorted him off the plane behind All Might when they arrived. Melissa and Izuku stood to one side to wait as the fans immediately surrounded the symbol of peace. Leaving David Shields, her father, with All Might, Izuku was shown the exhibits by Melissa. Still wishing to draw his focus to Momo, he appeared to brighten as he walked among the designs. She was demonstrating an aquatic suit to him when she looked over and saw Kyoka and Yaoyorozu coming into the exhibit hall. The other girl had seen Momo, but she was aware that Izuku had not yet. Melissa reached down and took Izuku's hand, thinking, maybe I can help Izuku after all. He turned to face her, perplexed. She leaned in to give him a kiss and said, "Trust me, Midoriya, what I am about to do is get Yaoyorozu and you back together." Momo saw Izuku and who he was with right away across the building. She became envious when she witnessed Melissa kissing him, intending to charge at them and eject Melissa from Izuku. Instead, with tears in her eyes, she turned and walked away. Kyoka trailed behind her. She said, "What is wrong, Momo?" And Momo let out a sharp sigh. "That Melissa kissed him. I can't believe he's here with her," Momo said angrily. "What do you expect, Momo? You broke up with him. If it is not Melissa then it could be Toru or Mina or any number of the girls from school." Kyoka responded. "Or me," she pondered. Momo put her hand over her eyes and leaned against a nearby wall, stammering, but. It is only supposed to be a short break from each other. Nothing more than that." Momo realized she had made a big mistake when Kyoka said, "You told him that you want to not be together so basically you broke up with him." She led Momo back to the hotel so they could change before attending the reception. "Come on, we need to get ready for the reception. Then you can tell him you were wrong and want to be a couple again." As Melissa returned to the exhibit hall, she watched with a smile as Kyoka Jiro and Yaoyorozu bounded out of the building. Jealousy was a great motivator for someone like Momo to realize she was mistaken to break up with Izuku, as she suspected her idea would succeed. Izuku looked at Melissa, his eyes wide, and he exclaimed, "What the hell was that?" Izuku was still not entirely convinced when Melissa explained, "Yaoyorozu was right over there, so I decided to fuel the flames of jealousy a little. I suspect by this time tomorrow she will want you back." As she led him out of the hall and toward her and her father's apartment, she lied and said, "Trust me, that kiss meant nothing." Actually, Melissa wished she could have had more kisses because she loved the little one. However, she also wanted him to be content, which meant that he and Momo should get back together. In other places, Tamura Shigaraki slammed his cell phone onto the nearby stand in sheer frustration. He unintentionally touched it with every finger, and it broke apart in his hand in a matter of seconds. Kurogiri said, "Still no answer." And Tamura gave him a stern look. Kurogiri's dark shadowy form vanished from view as Tamura gave the order, "No. Go over and tell him I want an update." Tamura was starting to question whether he should have given the scientist all of that money because he hadn't heard from Taronga in nearly a week. Kurogiri entered the secret location as usual and saw right away a number of signs that Taronga had left and would not be returning. Kurogiri, on his knees, prodded at the remains of a laptop and a cell phone. He took a breath while standing and noticed an odd smell coming from the space. Following the scent, he eased his way across the main room and discovered the source when he opened the closet. Hinja-chin, Taranga's helper, has a fresh wound on his forehead. One created by a gunshot. Every indication that Taranga had embezzled the $500,000. It wouldn't be good for Tamura. He closed the closet door and spent the next hour looking around the domicile for any indication of Taranga's whereabouts. I'm not particularly excited about telling Tamura and watching him have one of his typical homicidal outbursts. Kurogiri disappeared back to the League of Villain headquarters, having found nothing. The start. Momo was initially afraid of seeing Melissa and Izuku together again, so she did not want to go to the reception. However, Kyoka and Uraraka essentially made her leave. They both mentioned that if she didn't, they wouldn't go. Given that they had to dress up in gowns, Momo had a sneaking suspicion that neither of them wanted to go. Neither had previously done this. She was unable to move. She had to admit that both of them looked very good in the gowns as she led them to the elevator. Kyoka was constantly frowning at her reflection in the elevator's mirrored walls, which she found amusing. I couldn't believe how lovely she looked. Momo was aware that when Shoto Todoroki saw Kyoka wearing the gown, he would nearly pass out. All the others suspected Shoto was deeply infatuated with Kyoka. She saw Izuku waiting in a suit as she exited the elevator. She wanted to know if he was currently with Melissa and if their relationship was really over. However, Melissa showed up before she could get close to him, and then chaos broke out. Momo and the others ran up the steps, a plan in motion. They were in the middle of a terrorist attack when she first wanted to speak with Izuku and get him back. Izuku and the others were getting close to the point where they would have to pause and catch their breath, but Izuku had already put on the Guyver armor and was running up the stairs with little effort. Breathing heavily, she looked at Melissa and saw that the blonde wasn't even having trouble breathing. They continued running until they arrived at the indoor park. They had to part ways after that. While the others went on, Todoroko, Katsuki, and Eijiro stayed behind to battle the two villains. They broke up once more after coming across the sentry robots. Melissa was able to slam her fist against the cement wall while floating towards the wall thanks to Ochako Uraraka's trick, and she and Izuku were now on their way to the main computer. Melissa pointed to the nearby stairwell and said, "Up those stairs is the main computer room." It did not go well when they met the leader of the terrorists. Once there, I should be able to override the security systems and put everything back in order. Initially, the terrorist leader was unable to control, thwart, or even halt Izuku. This perplexed the leader because his magnetic quirk allowed him to control any kind of metal. Instead, the armored teen was encircled by 4-foot-long metal rods. He was thrown out through one of the windows with another gesture. As he watched the teenager disappear, the leader laughed and said, "I hope you enjoy the view on your way to the ground." Izuku had to struggle against the rods for a maximum of 10 stories before he managed to break free. He was too far away from the building to possibly grab onto it and halt his descent, but I'm not sure if that really mattered. As he plunged downward, he was unable to hear the wind rush past him inside the Guyver. Windows flew past him, and the interior of those windows was a blur. However, he vowed to have seen Momo inside, bound by a long, metal lash from one of the robot sentries. He tried to think of a way to stop himself as he kept falling. Oh, Izuku was aware that he could not possibly make it to the ground from this height. When he struck, he would, at most, leave a striking crater in the sidewalk. He let out a breath and glanced down to see the ground getting closer and closer. Because Momo was restrained by the robot and had no choice but to sit and wait, she was unable to resist looking out the window. She gasped when she saw a familiar object blur by the window. She was certain that the Guyver who had just dropped by the window was Izuku. Momo turned to face Kyoka, who said, "Hey, wasn't that Izuku Midoriya in his armor?" Momo said somberly, "Yes." She started crying, and the others were unaware that he had no chance of surviving when he hit the ground at the speed at which he had fallen by the window. She cried, lowering her head and closing her eyes. She hadn't had a chance to admit her error to him before he was going to die. She loved him, and she wanted him back. Izuku lost count as the windows kept rushing past. He looked back down and saw the ground coming quickly. Izuku grinned and whispered, "I just hope I do not feel the impact." That would royally suck. However, it wasn't particularly humorous. The first thing that sprang to mind was regret. The most significant was allowing Momo to end their relationship. He ought to have raised more objections. He remarked, For all the Guyver can do, it is a shame it can't fly. Then an odd thing occurred. He was hovering 50 feet above the ground when his descent slowed. He began to soar upward after sensing an odd crackling pulse of energy all around him. Holy shit. I can fly, he exclaimed, lifting his arms above his head as his ascent accelerated and the windows flew by. I can fly, he exclaimed as he raced along the building, arrived at the roof in a matter of seconds, and watched as a helicopter started to ascend, out of reach of Melissa, who had fallen to the roof. Izuku hovered over the cockpit, flying in front of it. Pointing to the hovering armored team that was preventing them from fleeing, the pilot said, "Ah, sir." When Izuku slowly moved his right arm downward and snapped out his blade, the leader looked at him in shock and then panic. He then pointed his arm upwards and intercepted the helicopter rotor blades. The helicopter blade was intercepted by the nearly indestructible blade, and he felt the impact, immediately cutting off roughly 2 feet of each of the 4 helicopter rotor blades. With only half of the rotor blades remaining, the pilot tried to bring the helicopter back down on the roof by increasing power. I am here. All Might had smashed through the helicopter that was descending slowly. Catching his friend, he landed on the roof as the helicopter burst into flames. Melissa and Izuku worked together to defeat the leader. 0. Izuku sat heavily on what was left of the flat roof and deactivated the Guyver. Someone embraced him tightly and tackled him before he was ready. His arms instinctively wrapped themselves around the girl he loved as her soft petals touched his. Izuku stroked Momo's back while whispering reassuring words to her as she started to cry uncontrollably. She took his hands in hers and stood up after a few minutes, pulling him in the direction of the stairs, resolved to spend time with him alone. Melissa grinned widely as she watched them leave from the other side of the roof. They were happy to be together again. Momo led Izuku across the plaza directly to her hotel after she descended in one of the elevators and arrived on the ground floor. Izuku asked, "Where are we going?" And Momo walked on purposefully. Momo said, "To my hotel room." Izuku was perplexed. She stopped and looked in his direction. He was still unable to comprehend her statement, "I love you is and I want to prove it." She continued straight to her room after saying, "We are going to have sex." She locked the door after putting the "Do Not Disturb" sign on it. Momo relaxed beside Izuku, letting out a slow breath before biting her lower lip. Yes, both this morning and last night were fantastic, but it also gave her some clarification. She was unable to cope with the fact that she did love Izuku. Not after she believed he was dead. She started to consider ways to prevent herself from experiencing the same heartache she was experiencing at the time. Izuku saw the look on her face and worried. After Izuku asked, "Is there something wrong, Em?" Momo nodded and swallowed. Yes. Momo bit her lip once more, choosing to lie to him in the hopes that she won't cry while doing it. He began to say, "You know I love you is, but I think we need to reconsider our relationship." She felt a few tears well up in her eyes and noticed that he was crying too. "Wait, let me finish. I want to be a hero and I know if we continue to be like this eventually I will have to give up my dream. At most I think we can be friends. But I do not want our relationship to be any more than that. I just cannot have any serious relationships that would interfere with me being a hero." She was dying over this. Izuku muttered, "What are you saying?" in the hopes that this time she wouldn't truly end their relationship. With all of her strength, Momo suppressed her tears and grief as she said, "I think we should actually break up." Izuku said, "Heartbroken, please we can make this work." He wanted to at least try to get her to reconsider. However, she gave a negative shake of her head. He was unable to finish because it was unacceptable that she would want to end things after what they had done. "If you planned on breaking up with me then why did we?" Momo finished for him. 6. "Because you have been my first boyfriend, my first love, and my first kiss. I wanted you to be my first sexual experience." She had to fight the urge to confess. She wanted to live her life with him. Izuku let out a breath, and tears rolled down his cheeks. She turned her head and let out a rough exhale before pointing to the door and saying, "I need you to leave Midoriya." Tears were streaming down her face. After a moment of hesitation, he reached out to touch her exposed shoulder. She gave a start to her left shoulder. Strictly, she said, "Please go." Izuku complained angrily, got out of bed, and began putting his clothes on. "Fine, if that is what you want." She wanted to take his hand, confess her love for him, and admit she was mistaken. Izuku staggered over to the door, opened it, and slammed it shut. Momo collapsed onto the pillows inside and started sobbing uncontrollably. Izuku leaned against the wall in the hallway. He covered his eyes with his hands and sobbed. It took him a few minutes to leave the hotel, and when he did, he looked back at it, wishing desperately to return and plead with her to change her mind. In order to grieve alone for a few hours, he went to Melissa's instead. 0. At first, Melissa didn't inquire because she thought it was odd that Izuku was returning on her plane rather than Momo Yaoyorozu's. He was just staring out the window when she looked at him again. Izuku whispered loud enough for Melissa to hear, "We broke up for good." Melissa was perplexed by this since she was certain that her scheme to reunite them had been successful. Melissa stammered, "Why?" Izuku turned to face her and let out a sharp exhale. Izuku's response, which Melissa found a little odd, was, "She wants to be a hero and believes that if we continue then she won't be able to be one. She does not want to be in a relationship with me anymore." She then recalled the article written a few years prior by a pro-heroine. According to the heroine, women shouldn't be in any personal relationships because it would make it difficult for them to be effective heroes. I am sorry Midoriya, I do not agree with her reasoning. After all, what is the point of being a hero if you cannot come home to someone? All it sounds to me is she is going to have a very lonely life. Melissa said with a sigh. Izuku returned to staring out the plane's window after saying, "Can we talk about this later? Right now I just want to stare out the window and try to think of her." Momo Yaoyorozu informed the other passengers on a different plane that she and Izuku Midoriya had permanently split up. She rushed to the restroom to cry once more an hour into the flight. She revealed the truth to Toru and Mina after they followed her. 0. Takayama Yu, also known as Mount Lady, paced the airport impatiently, waiting for the flight to arrive. She made the decision that she wanted the first opportunity to hire Izuku Midoriya, also known as the Guyver, after hearing other agencies show interest in him during the sports festival. She therefore awaited his arrival from I-Island in order to beat the others. Although she had been tempted to attend the expo, she was unable to do so due to an unforeseen circumstance. Not to mention that there was no invitation. She complained as she checked the arrival time board again, hesitantly checking the terminal occasionally to make sure that no other agency heads were thinking or imagining the same thing. None have so far, and she is obviously 3 years too young to enlist him. She grinned when she saw the plane. She arrived at the arrival ramp 25 minutes later, and Melissa Shields walked directly toward Izuku Midoriya when she first emerged. When Izuku saw the pro-heroine at the airport, he was taken aback. "Mount Lady." With her most enduring smile, Takayama said, "I would like to discuss something with you. In private if it is possible." This statement totally perplexed Melissa and Izuku. Izuku stumbled, still unsure of her purpose and the topic she wished to discuss. Well, okay I guess. All he could think about was his lost love, even though his mind was not functioning properly at the moment, which made him feel even more depressed because it seemed to take up all of his thoughts. Takayama left the two students stunned as he said, "Good. Let's say dinner later, I will send an Uber to pick you up. Say about 7 p.m. Until Melissa made the decision to make fun of her hero partner in an attempt to make him behave more normally. Melissa chuckled a little and remarked, "Sounds to me you have a date with Mount Lady." Izuku gave her a scowl. Melissa couldn't help but laugh as Izuku said, "Oh come on. Be serious. She is like what 6 years older than me and right now I just can't stop thinking about Momo." He then went to the baggage claim to retrieve his one bag. He grabbed his bag and waited for the transit train outside. His mind was racing with ideas as he tried to come up with a reason why Mt. Lady had invited him to dinner. She wanted to speak with him. He was at a loss for ideas the entire way home. After taking a shower, he made the decision to wear business casual. Black dress shoes, dark slacks, and a light blue long-sleeved shirt with the bottom up. The Uber showed up an hour later. He was happy with his choice of attire once he arrived at the restaurant. He was shown to a table inside the restaurant by a man, and he took a seat. He arrived at least 30 minutes early, but he was seated because Mt. Lady had a reservation. He gazed wide-eyed as Mt. Lady arrived. Like the majority of the men present, she wore a very tight, bright blue dress that hung low on her amazing cleavage and was held up by tied straps around the back of her neck. Her knees and upper thigh were separated by a slit. Men openly gawked at her as she walked past other tables, which was not well received by the people they were with. She smiled at him as she reached the table. He got up quickly and dragged her chair out. Takayama pushed the chair inward and said, "Thank you. It seems your mother taught you to be a gentleman." She gave a little giggle when he nearly fell while trying to sit. Izuku licked his parched lips as she said, "Oh, and thank you for coming. Now I guess I better explain why I asked you here." Izuku continued to smile as she said, "You said you wanted to discuss something, Mount Lady." Takayama leaned closer, observing his apparent nervousness, and said, "Please call me Taki." "Calm down, kid. I did not ask you here because I plan on seducing you. Though you are really cute. Perhaps when you are older I might take a shot at you," she was thinking. His gut churned with uncertainty as he instinctively replied, "Izuku." His goal was to stay at home and avoid thinking about his heartbreak. Since the sports festival, a good number of the hero agencies have become impressed with you. Mine included. In time they will approach you with offers to join them as a sidekick. I wanted to be the first. That is why I asked you here to discuss the possibility that after you graduate, to see if you might be interested." Takayama said to him at that point when the waiter arrived. Izuku nodded when she said, "Sake. Would you like a soda or something?" The waiter left after she said, "Bring him a pitcher of Coke." Sake was inadvertently placed in Izuku's pitcher of soda by the bartender, who was unaware of this. She and Izuku both drank after the drinks arrived. Then they both poured another, him from the pitcher and her from the little bottle. She said, "So what do you think?" Izuku told her, swallowing more soda, "I don't know. Melissa and I are currently training to be a hero team." Although it tasted odd, he thought that because it was a fancy restaurant, the flavor was distinct from others. Takayama shrugged and took a sip of sake. After telling him, Takayama ordered another bottle of sake and said, "That would be fine. I would be willing to sign both of you to my agency." He continued to pour from the pitcher. After 2 hours of talking about her offer, they were both a little tipsy. She asked him to come to her office as she left the restaurant. She desired to demonstrate her agency to him. She was unable to stop herself in the elevator. She pulled him close to her as she leaned forward to kiss him. After a few minutes, they found themselves in her bedroom. She quickly took off her dress as they collapsed onto her bed, and everything became unclear for them both. Takayama opened her eyes reluctantly as the sun shone through the window. Immediately experiencing a hangover, she moaned and covered her eyes with her left hand. She felt a warm body resting on her right arm as she attempted to raise it. Trying to recall who it might be, she muttered, "Okay, so I brought someone home after the meeting with Izuku Midoriya," concentrating on the person in her bed with her dry eyes. The green hair caught her attention at once. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. Takayama yelled, "Oh shit!" And Izuku awoke. His eyes grew wide, and then he let out a groan as well. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut and grimaced, "My head." He sat up after reopening them. He looked at Takayama and said, "What the?" He said, "Oh man. Tell me we didn't." And she bit her lower lip while staring at him. Takayama peered into a nearby trash can and said, "Okay, as far as I can tell, I still have my panties and bra on. No condoms there." She always made sure all of her guests, even the blind and inebriated, used a condom. She let out a sharp breath and opened the nightstand. Unopened, the 2 boxes remained. She exclaimed, "Oh thank God." With relief. Izuku checked himself under the sheet and said, "I do not remember anything after finished drinking all that strange flavored Coke." He said, "I still have my pants on." Takayama let out another sigh of relief. Then Takayama swallowed, saying, "I think you got drunk last night. The bartender must have put alcohol in your Coke by accident." Okay. From what I can tell we did not do anything. However, she found her area tingling and her panties were wet when she retouched them. She had a suspicion that Izuku or she herself had played with her down there, but she couldn't be certain. She had no intention of speaking. "I think it best if anyone asks you fell asleep on the couch and do not tell anyone that we spent the night in my bed." Izuku gave a quick nod. Izuku frowned and said, "All right." He reached for his jacket and shirt next to the bed, donning them. As she watched Izuku put on his shirt and then his jacket, Takayama remarked, "Good, because I could get into some serious trouble legally if anyone found out. Even though we didn't do anything. After all, you are still considered a minor." She grabbed an aspirin from the drawer after he left. She was aware that, at most, they had shared a kiss and possibly a small amount of fondling according to the law. That might be regarded as child molestation, which is illegal. Fortunately, they had dozed off before anything truly outrageous occurred. If not, She thought she would have slept with him. She raised her right hand and swore, saying, "Okay, from this point on I officially am on the wagon. No more getting drunk and no more drinking." Izuku tried to recall what had truly happened with Mount Lady as he rode the train home. Yes, he had no intention of ever telling anyone that he had slept with her in bed that night. Since they were still a couple in his heart and he couldn't fathom being with someone else, he started to question whether this meant he had cheated on Momo. His mood was not improved by those thoughts. Hero exams week before, the entire classroom was rocked by the news that the written and practical exams were coming up the following week. Izuku made the decision to at least try to be friends with Momo before the class started that day. Momo sat down and said, "Hello Midoriya." She longed to embrace him and give him a kiss. Inform him that although she was mistaken, she couldn't proceed if he were taken away from her. Izuku responded, "Hello Yaoyorozu." He essentially thought the same thing. He wanted to implore her to change her mind once more. But he knew she wouldn't take him back, so it wouldn't help. Both of them were still unsure of how to respond in this circumstance. "I guess we need to address the elephant in the room. This is going to take some time for us to be at most friends." Momo gave a nod. Following Momo's, "Yes it will," response, they engaged in a highly awkward conversation until Mr. Iwasa entered the room to provide them with the specifics regarding next week. Once everyone had left class, Mina Ishido and Toru Hagakure were left alone. They had to choose who would approach Izuku and begin their planned activity. Toru shrugged when Mina asked, "Okay, so how do you want to do this?" To be fair, Toru put on a pair of gloves and responded, "Rock paper scissors. Best 2 out of 3. They then held a contest, which Mina won. "Yes." Mina grinned broadly. Toru crossed her arms in front of her chest as she said, "I get to ask him out first." Knowing that her friend was desperate for a boyfriend, she said, "Oh stop pouting Toru, I won fair and square and I very much doubt that you will follow the plan after going out with him." A few octaves were added to Toru's voice. Mina could tell that her friend was indeed pouting over her loss, even though Toru claimed, "I am not pouting." Mina laughed as the invisible teen said somberly, "And I would too." She felt the impulse to say, "Yeah, right." Now she just needed to find a chance to ask him out. Since practically everyone in the class was aware of the plan and thought Momo and Izuku belonged together, she had to do it or else they wouldn't be able to get them back together. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been the same balance in the class. 0. Izuku was not really listening as he walked in the direction of the train station. In addition to his recent breakup, which he could not stop thinking about, he was also troubled by the enormous error he had made with Mt. Lady. It wasn't until someone touched his arm that he heard his name. Mina Ishido said, "Hey Izuku, didn't you hear me?" And Izuku's face flushed. Mina shrugged when Izuku said, "Sorry, I wasn't really paying attention." "Do you need something, Mina? I thought it might be nice if we caught the same train. Generally my dad drives me to school and picks me up. He is a little overprotective, believing that some sicko is going to assault me or today he had to work over. So I get to ride the train." Mina clarified and Izuku thought that was somewhat odd. Mina's acid could burn someone into a tiny puddle. It would take an absolute idiot to try to attack her. As they arrived at the train platform and nearly arrived at both of their stops, they kept talking. After getting off the train, she pointed to her right thumb and told him, "I live over that way." Izuku informed her, "I am that way. Those apartments over there," indicating the apartment building where he and his mother reside. After a brief pause, Mina swallowed. Izuku was a little taken aback when Mina said, Izuku, I know I am being a little forward. But would you like to go out sometime soon? You know, on a date." Izuku couldn't help but smile when the pink girl said, "Remember I told Momo and you once that if you two broke up, I plan on asking you out. So I am asking." However, he wasn't sure if he was ready to start dating again, especially since his only thought was how he could finally get Momo back. Izuku proposed, "Sure, why not? I am busy Friday studying, so how about Saturday?" Mina grinned. As she left, Mina grabbed her phone and said, "That sounds good. Let's finish it tomorrow at school. Well, I better get home before my dad calls the cops. See you tomorrow." She texted all of the people involved in the plan right away. Phase 1 complete. Make sure you know WHO does not find out. She received a positive response from everyone concerned. After observing her for a few minutes, Izuku scowled. He wasn't sure if he was truly prepared to start dating. He longed for Momo to return, missed her terribly, and questioned whether he would ever be able to move on from her. 2 hours prior to the start of class on Friday morning, all of the participants arrived early. They had to make sure that everyone was aware of their location. Mina turned to Kyoka Jiro, Toru Hagakure, and Tsuyu Asui and said, "Okay, so tomorrow I will have Izuku take me to the movies at the mall." She then turned to face Ochako Uraraka and Melissa Shields and said, "You three are going to basically drag Momo there. Today make sure that Momo does not find out about my and Izuku's date. Otherwise I doubt she will go," she stated, and both of them nodded. Katsuki Bakugo snarled from the side, "I still think it would be easier if we just forced them together." Everyone looked at the explosive quirker, still a little incredulous that he had agreed to assist them. "How? Besides, we are using some of your original idea, locking the two of them into a closet and making them work this out," said Shoto Todoroki. As Eijiro Kirishima put it, everyone here knows that if Izuku turns into the Guyver he could rip or cut that door into confetti within seconds. So how are we going to stop him from doing that? No one was really sure how to stop him. The closet that we have arranged is too small. If he activates his armor he could hurt Yaoyorozu. Tenya Iida said. He glanced at the others, and they all nodded. So the rest of us will be at the mall, ready to implement the plan. To ensure that everyone was still on board with his terms, Katsuki declared, "As long as I am the one that gets to push Deku into the closet. Then I will be there." When Mina and Toru discovered that Momo truly did not want to end her relationship with Izuku, nearly the entire class decided to step in. That she was scared of losing him, which is why she had lied to him. After informing those involved, her two friends devised a plan. Mr. Iwasa's sudden appearance in the room caused everyone to stop talking. Looking at them, Iwasa remarked, "It appears that the majority of the class is about an hour early." Pointing out that it appeared that the only people missing were Momo Yaoyorozu, Denki Kaminari, Minoru Mineta, and Izuku Midoriya. He glared at a few of his students, but they avoided eye contact. "I have a distinct impression that this involves something to do with a couple of your classmates." Tenya Iida shifted uneasily as he asked, "So class rep, are you going to tell me what is going on or do I have to guess?" Mina Ishido suddenly rose from her chair. Iwasa looked straight at Mina as she said, we are going to get Izuku and Momo back together." He was aware of the reason why the class had been acting strangely over the past few days. Particularly after he had been informed that Midoriya and Yaoyorozu were no longer romantically involved and that Yaoyorozu had approached him to ask for a transfer to Class B. Thus, it was causing chaos in the class. With a cunning smile, Iwasa asked, "I assume that you have all devised a plan or strategy to achieve this." He didn't want to lose anyone in a transfer because everyone here has shown that they belong here, and it was unacceptable to lose even one to such stupidity. Iwasa turned back to the door after Toru Hagakure said, "Yes sir. We have a plan." With a slight smile on his lips, Iwasa departed after saying, "Then get it done and make it happen." When he went to the teacher's lounge to take a quick nap, he thought, "Good, I do not have to get involved." He spoke with Nimori Kayama, also known as Midnight, a day ago about ways to bring Class 1A back into balance, and she recommended that they try to end the romantic relationship between Izuku Midoriya and Momo Yaoyorozu. Iwasa didn't want to get too involved because of his personality, but he felt he would have to in order to maintain the balance of his class. He didn't have to now that the students appeared to have found a way, which gave him great pleasure. The students completed the plan back in class. By practicing their parts, they were all prepared for tomorrow when the first bell rang.
I will continue the story in next part. Till then, bye bye.